It's me, Brandon, again. We are doing questions and signing more signature pages. If you didn't see the last one of these, I have 10,000 of these Way of Kings signature pages. And there's music playing for some reason. That I need to sign before the end of this week. So we figured I would just answer some questions and chat with you guys while I'm doing this. Be warned, my children are over here this time, so instead of a, no? Oh, they're mad that I warned you that they're coming. There are no children over here at all. Not a single one. And I am just going to start signing these things. And Adam is going to ask me questions.
You want to wait for a minute for it to build, or just go straight into it? Okay.
And I assume you'll send another tweet and stuff and let people know that we're going. So, why don't you just hit me with a question? And we'll see how it.
So the first one is from Facebook from Cody Skalmowski. He says, "I've struggled with mental illness my whole life. Reading about your characters like Shallan, Kaladin, and Dalinar that all have some degree of mental illness start their path to recovery after forming a Nahel bond is very interesting to me. Is it a requirement for a Knight Radiant to be broken in some way prior to the bond? Where did you get this idea, or was it just how it turned out?"
So there's a bunch of different answers to this, a variety of directions I can go. Part of it is, this is how it turned out, right? As I was developing the characters, I knew very early on, after the 2002 version didn't quite work of Way of Kings, that I knew what I wanted to do with Kaladin. And Shallan's character, this has always been a central feature of who she was, even before, I came up with her modern version of the character. And so there was a theme building there on its own. And when I notice a theme, I ask myself, is there a reason that I'm looking at this, doing this? Why is it a theme? And I realized this is something that was very interesting to me. I have several loved ones who have mental health issues that they deal with. It was something I didn't see done a lot in heroic or epic fantasy, and it felt very natural as a place to go. That the Knight Radiant bond is about, making this bond with this spren and striving to become a better person. It is not required in World. A lot of people, even in World, think that it is because it was so common. My kind of external answer to that, even though they don't know this in World, is just that people who have struggled with these kinds of problems are more open to walking the path that one needs to walk to become a Knight Radiant. The two go hand in hand. The kind of self-awareness and ability to be to see yourself. What is that phrase I'm looking for? To be reflective. Just goes hand in hand with working on some of these issues. And at the same time, I felt it just worked really well with the themes of the story, the themes that Dalinar has of redemption, and also I think that the extreme circumstances that a lot of characters we put through stories like the ones I write do lead people to have some difficulties, right? Even PTSD and things like that. There's just a lot that goes hand in hand together with this, and so the answer is yes. It happened to be that way, but once I noticed it happened to be that way, I asked myself, is this a theme I'm doing on purpose, even if I haven't noticed it? And the answer to that was yes, it is. So there's a bit of a rambling question to answer the question. Oh no, completely unexpectedly, out of nowhere, my children have shown up to attack me with Nerf swords. Don't.
Goodbye.
Do you guys want to get the big ones and bring them over to show them? Some wonderful people who make foam swords for LARPing and things built us some foam shard blades, and so They are bigger than my children are, which makes it very fun for them to hit each other. Don't actually hit the camera, Ollie.
Dad, can we do a video of Sheldon?
Yes, sometime you can do a video of Sheldon. Sheldon is Dallin's tortoise. Move that
And
over.
I'm named after Dalinar.
Yes, you are named after Dalinar from the books. And Oliver is named after Oliver. Huh, Oliver?
Yes.
From the Wheel of Time. So, and Joel, who is not appearing on this stream, is named after Joel from the Arithmetist. Alright, guys. You can go to bed now. You can see yourselves on YouTube. I don't know how many of you have children, but my children love YouTube. And when they heard that I was going to be on YouTube, this was like the single most exciting thing that they had ever heard of me doing. So, Forged Foam is the name of the people who made us these things. They were very cool.
No more
they were next
fighting.
to
No
us,
more fighting.
at a convention, and
I'm
dropped
ready.
these by. So,
Me too.
all right, off you go. Good night, guys.
User Southpaw would just like a good night for him before he goes to
Southpaw,
bed.
Good night. I've seen you around on forums and things before. I feel like I know who you are in real life also. So, anyway, goodbye, Southpaw. Good night.
The next question comes from Facebook, from Jason Kellogg. It says, no question, kind of. Says, but can you suggest names for my wife's dragon? I've already got him guarding my treasure, as any good dragon should.
Okay, names for your wife's dragon. Well, it depends on whether you want a literary name or not. I'm always partial to the dragons from Dragon Riders of Pern, which was kind of my first big series that I read. But the funny thing about those dragons is I always pronounce their names just as unpronounceable collections of sounds in my head. I'm like, this is a dragon's name. It's not a name that a human can pronounce. So there was like one I called Menemenemeth or something like that, and whatnot. Let's see. What's a good dragon name? Definitely
Not fluffy.
not Fluffy. Well, I guess that depends on the dragon.
That's true.
It really
That's
does.
True.
Not Smaug.
Nat Smaug.
Yeah, I was taken.
My first, I'm assuming that this is either a stuffed dragon or a bird, like my dragon. My first dragon's name was Hawk. He was a little lovebird, and he loved to dive bomb me while I was reading books. And my second dragon's name was Beaker, which is an excellent name for any avian variety dragon, because they do tend to sound like Beaker from the Muppets, and they have beaks, and so people really like that name. So I would suggest Beaker. But other than that, one of Anne McCaffrey's dragon names, Menemenemeth. There you go.
This one comes from YouTube, from Smagby. It says, Brandon, what are some of your non-writing goals in life?
What are some of my non-writing goals in life? Man. Well, let's see. I generally have a goal to try to get to the gym at least twice a week. And I'm pretty decent about that one. Going to the gym is just more about feeling healthy than anything. Sure, I would love to lose some weight, but that's not the gym is not generally the place to do that, as I understand it. You just need to eat less. But going to the gym, it helps me keep up with my children a little bit. So there is one. The guy at the gym, John at our local gym, is pretty awesome. And he is a fun guy. So if anyone goes to the Vasa gym in American Forts, say hi to John for me. He's a great guy. What other non-writing goals do I have? So many of my goals are writing based, right?
Go somewhere?
What's that? Go somewhere? Yeah, I mean, we talk about, hey, can Brandon get to all 50 states? Like, people like to check things like that off, but it feels just a little more arbitrary to me than I would like. I mean, I don't really, goals for me are things that I set that are hard to do, and the things I have to keep going on. So usually, almost always, a goal for me is going to be about creating some sort of habit, and then once the habit's in place, then it's no longer a goal because I've just made the habit, right? I like to make sure I read some scriptures in the morning, right? It's a Mormon thing. And I found that I was not doing this, so I made a habit of just doing it every morning at a certain point, and then it became a habit, and then 20 years later, it's just a thing I do, so it's not a goal anymore. And so the goals are things like I need to make sure I write this much by this time, and that's a writing goal, or go to the gym this many times. The things I'm still, have to keep an eye on and keep doing that haven't become habits for me yet. I'm a very big believer in the kind of hack your brain, make good habits sort of thing. Like people often talk about some people being motivated and other people not being motivated, which I think sometimes we do a disservice. You guys have probably heard me ramble on this sometimes by pretending that some people are very motivated and other people aren't motivated, because I think most of the time motivation comes down to habits, and sometimes we feel guilty. I know I did when I was younger. I'm like, man, if I were just a better person, I would not have to make some sort of weird goal to get done the things that I want to do. I would just naturally do it. And the older I've gotten, the more I've realized that that's just not the way it is. That the people who get things done, who accomplish things, are the people who recognize human nature works in certain ways, and the best way to get yourself to do something is to build a habit using basic incentives and things like that, and saying, all right, I'm going to use this incentive basically to trick my brain into liking doing this thing. I'm going to do it long enough that doing it becomes a habit so that I just keep doing it. I often point out, people ask, how am I so productive in my writing? And the trick here for me is that if I record what I'm doing each day and watch the numbers count up, then I am naturally just more productive. It's one of these little I hate using life hack because that is such an overused term, but I just found that if I make a spreadsheet and I record what my daily word count is, and then I have a goal, a total that I'm shooting for, and I have the spreadsheet say, you are this percentage of the way done towards your goal, then just like wanting to level up in a video game and watching your little meter go up to ding at the next level, I will watch my book count go up, and I will naturally try to get that higher and higher. And it's just a simple little change, recording it down, but it makes all the difference to me.
This next one comes from Twitter, from user PageRunner. Says, let's use a time machine and change the past.
Ooh.
Let's say you aren't asked to finish the Wheel of Time, and instead fix and publish Lyre of Partenel. How do you think the Cosmere fan experience would have been different if mysteries like Hoyd and the Shattering had been explored earlier?
Boy, this is an excellent question, and it's hypothetical enough that I can ignore the my cheeky answer to time machine questions is always don't go back in the past. I've seen that story too much, but in this case, Lyre of Partenel. So Lyre of Partenel did not work, right? I had already abandoned it and started working on the Arithmetist. So if I had not been asked to finish the Wheel of Time, most likely I would have thrown myself into the Arithmetist more. And then the question becomes, would I have decided to do Way of Kings, or would I have gone and taken another stab at Lyre of Partenel? And for your hypothesis, for this one, I will say that I did that. I don't think I actually would have. I think that I was disappointed enough in Lyre of Partenel and realizing that this wasn't the right time that I would have gone a different direction. But for the hypothetical, let's say I did. What would it have changed? Certainly, I don't know that I would have gotten all the way through the Hoyd series before starting Way of Kings. More likely, I would have done Lyre of Partenel as a standalone, then done something else, and eventually released book 2 of that. Because remember, back then, I had envisioned this as a 7-book series, right? I was looking for a big epic to do, and I thought, let's do the Dragonsteel series, and I'll do several books about Hoyd, and then I'll do the full story of Bridge 4, which was then on Yolen, not on Roshar. And so you would have gotten that story on Yolen instead, and then who knows where that would have gone, right? When I release Dragonsteel itself, which won't be too much longer, you guys will be able to read kind of the earliest version of Bridge 4 back before Kaladin was involved and it was on Yolen. And so I think that at that point we would have learned more about Hoyd, but we probably wouldn't have pushed all the way to the Shattering, I don't think. But, hypothetically, let's say I do. I don't know how much of a change that makes, honestly, over Stormlight, right? Knowing the personalities of the 3 shards involved and a little bit more on Hoyd certainly would change your perspective on them. But Stormlight, assuming, it's so hard to go on these hypotheticals, right? Because if I write Dragonsteel with Bridge 4, then Bridge 4 isn't in Stormlight, right? Which is just, it's very hard to imagine where Stormlight goes. It's possible that I make it completely Talon story and Stormlight becomes a 5-book series, which focuses on what's going to be the back 5. That would be my best guess of where that would go. And so instead of 10 books, you get 5 books, and we focus on Talon as the main character, and Kaladin just vanishes, right? We don't have Kaladin as a character. He's replaced by whoever takes the lead in Dragonsteel. But of course, the flip-flopping, what actually happened is Dragonsteel shrunk to 3 books to focus on Hoyd, because I realized I was doing in Stormlight all the things that I intended to do in Dragonsteel, and they were working better in Stormlight, and I no longer needed that Bridge 4 sequence in Dragonsteel because it worked so well in Stormlight. So it is hard to say what exactly we go on. You would know the personalities of the shards. How about that? You would definitely know who they are. You would know a lot more about Hoyd. So
This next one comes from Riley O'Byrne. They are asking for advice on where to publish short stories.
Where to publish short stories? Well, I am not the ideal person to ask on this because I didn't publish any short fiction until I got published in novels. And so after that, I was selling short fiction based on my already established reputation. The other big reason why I'm not a good person to ask about this is because while I did know about the short story market back in the early 2000s when I was trying to break in, I have not kept up with it. And we had a major revolution happen to the publishing industry in 2010 with the release of the Kindle and the shift to ebooks. To the point that Starsight, my latest book, was only 17% print its opening week. And it was 83% ebook and audiobook, which are incredible numbers because if you would have gone back to 2009, 10 years before, and asked about that, then it would have been 95% print back then. And people were still saying, oh, ebooks are not a thing, we're not going to have the same revolution that audiobooks had and things like that. It's just not going to happen in print. People like their print books too much, and, well, here we are, 83% digital. So, yeah, I went off on kind of a strange direction there, but let me suggest that you, if you like short stories, the best thing you can do is you can start to read short stories. If you want to publish them, be reading them. Best places generally to go, in my opinion, are to get collections of years best if you want to kind of start dabbling in short stories. Gardner Dozois was my favorite before he passed away, but be looking for years best science fiction and fantasy volumes. Go read those, then see where the stories were originally published. That will give you a good idea of the stories that you like, where they're originally going. Get subscriptions to those magazines, those webzines, or go read online to where those are, and start seeing where the stories that you like are being published. The thing about the short story market is short story magazines tend to have a fairly strong editorial hand where the people who are the editors of them are looking for specific types of stories. And you may write fantastic short stories that are not a match for FNSF magazine, for instance, which for years was skewed literary. I don't know how it is right now, right? I haven't been following these markets. But you may write something that's a little more popular fiction-esque. In that case, Rise of the Future does tend to skew more popular, which tends to be a good place to submit. Though, if you're submitting Rise of the Future, you should be well aware of the contest rules and where it comes from and things like that. There are lots of online sources these days, right? Tor.com publishes novellas to great success and often is way strongly represented at the Hugos these days. But there are a lot of places like Clark's World and things like that that are doing lots of cool things in short story that I just have not kept up on. So go ask some short story writers. Talk to Mary Robinette about that one. Don't ask the guy who writes 400,000 word fantasy epics and one short story every 5 years. Go to the people who are actually doing it.
This next one comes from Facebook by Andrew Garlock. He says, faith is a huge topic in a lot of your storylines, and your characters are extremely diverse. From the extremely devotional, like Vivina, to those going through crisis or loss of faith, like Sazed and Dalinar, to atheistic, like Yasna. All of them are very thoroughly thought out, make in-depth examples from their points of view, and are never used as the character who is, in quotations, just wrong. How have you been able to find such believable voices for characters from all viewpoints?
What an excellent question. I consider this one of my duties as a writer, is to explore multiple sides of a topic before I approach it in my fiction. I just think doing my due diligence and understanding particularly how people who believe differently from myself are going to view the topic just as not just vital, it's part of why I write. It's part of why I read, so that I can understand viewpoints different from myself, or from my own viewpoints. And I consider it just, for me, an essential part of the process. That doesn't mean that it's wrong to go into a story wanting to advocate for a certain viewpoint, but even in that case, I would recommend that if the contrary viewpoints are, instead of being straw men, strong and legitimate arguments that people make and would make against your opinion, the strong arguments, the good arguments, that your story is going to be stronger. And in fact, if you present those arguments well, then I feel like your own argument, assuming it is strong and well thought out, is going to come across better. And so I would just recommend this as a rule of thumb for everyone. We live in a wonderful time in that it is very easy to find primary sources by people who are writing about their experiences, whatever they are. I am fascinated by religion, if you can't tell. It is really easy to find fascinating and interesting takes on religion from all sides of the religious spectrum on the internet by people who are explaining and expressing their views. And this is really great. It is somewhat sad to me that it feels, it could be wrong, right? This could just be, that's one of these things we talk about happening but not actually happening. But I feel like views are becoming more insular the more we talk about them on the internet, which feels contrary to what I would have expected, right? And so it feels sad to me if that truly is the case, that views are becoming more insular, that people are reading less about other viewpoints because they are bombarded with so many viewpoints online. But I would recommend as a writer that this is a wonderful time to be a writer because of how easy it is to find primary sources. I find the human experience fascinating and interesting. I find your human experience to be fascinating and interesting, and reading about it on people's blogs is really helpful for me to just understand the variety of how people think, act, and how they interface with the divine, or how they approach a humanistic lifestyle and viewpoint and perspective. And I really like this stuff. Every character I write is also me trying to explore the world as if I were someone else, to try to understand the world. And it becomes important for me then to try to explore the world through the eyes of different types of people, because I find it more interesting, more exciting, and it helps me to understand the world a little better. So this is what I love to do. This is one of the main things that made me be a writer.
From the chat, user Dax Dibble is curious regarding your thoughts on Final Fantasy, specifically Final Fantasy X.
So, Final Fantasy X is my favorite Final Fantasy. I am surprised that you were able to pick that one out. For me, when they went voice acted, which 10 was the first one that I believe was fully voice acted, I could be wrong, my Final Fantasy lore might be off, but for me, 10 really clicked. There are a couple of reasons for this. One was the voice acting, right? I thought the voice acting was really strong. The other was that I like 7 and 8 quite a bit. They are excellent games to play. But Final Fantasy stories have this sort of convoluted plotting problem that I empathize with and understand completely, because writing epic fantasies, it is very difficult to not be convoluted at times. In fact, I would say that I have been very convoluted myself at times in my fiction. But the stories do get kind of convoluted, and I felt there was something a little more streamlined about 10. The other thing I loved about 10 was after playing 7 and 8, I was ready for a change in main characters, and I know 9 did this to an extent, but 10 was the first one that I really got a very distinctive and different character. I liked playing as a jock, right? As a happy-go-lucky jock, whereas 7 and 8 were broody, angst-ridden, kind of a little more classic heroes that you would think I would empathize with more, and I really did. But it goes back to this, let me play as someone different from myself. Titus just felt so different and such a breath of fresh air. And I really enjoyed playing as him. It was just very different. So mix that, those kind of 3 things together. The voice acting, the storyline feeling a little more focused. I like the music best of 10. To Zanarkand is one of my favorite little piano pieces ever. And 10 just really worked for me. As a American, I did not get to play several of the Final Fantasies during their initial releases. I was not. I know there are people who could get the Japanese imports of like number 2 and things like that and play them, but I was not hardcore enough for that. So while I played 1 and really liked it, and I played 4 and 6, I think were released as 2 and 3 in the States. See, Final Fantasy people will have to tell me what actually it was, but I played each one that was released in the States, and I really enjoyed them. With 6, of course, having the best story, I think, of any of the Final Fantasies. That moment in the middle of 6, which I won't tell you in case you haven't played it, but which everything gets upended, and what you thought you were fighting for no longer is something that matters. That was a very big moment in my kind of understanding of what you could do with a story. So I really like 6, but 10 was my favorite. I did play. I never played the MMO ones, and I did really like whichever one was that had the guy who talked about being the leading man and stuff like that. That guy was great. I think that was 12. That guy was awesome. I do wish there were. That was also the one that had bunny girls in lingerie, which. Come on.
I don't think that was 12.
That wasn't 12. Was that 13 then?
Because the Xenoblade Chronicles is 12, isn't it? The Japanese version.
I have no idea. See, now we're going to get in trouble because we're getting our Final Fantasy lore.
Yeah.
But bunny girls in lingerie, not exactly my favorite thing to have running around on the screen in a war situation. Bunny girls in lingerie would be fine in a video game where you are playing as people running a burlesque, but come on, she's out fighting there. Give her some armor. But I did not play the latest one, which I bought it and I started playing it and I could not get into the combat. I just couldn't make it click for me, so I may have to give it another try. It was the one that was for a long time directed by the person who directed the Kingdom Hearts games, and so I thought that the combat would be really active and interesting, and it felt like button mashing, and I just could not get into it, so maybe eventually.
This next one comes from @loyalty1309. They're wondering if you will ever do one of these as a spoiler full stream.
Yeah, I was thinking about the other day, and most likely if we keep doing these, like a month after Stormlight 4 is out, we'll just do a spoiler full Stormlight focused one where you can ask all Stormlight questions, and we'll kind of limit it to a series like that, right? Like I'll do a Mistborn at another point or something like that. That way, people can kind of self-select into it. So be looking for, maybe this time next year, we'll do a spoiler full one for Stormlight where you can ask about the new book or anything about the Stormlight books.
Okay. This one's from @Jerem at home. This is a two-part question. It says, how was it building your dungeon/basement? What did you put there, and what did the neighbors think? And his wife wants to know how your cats are doing.
So, let's run down these questions. For those who are not aware, I am building a supervillain lair. Now, this is what happens when authors get too successful, I guess. We bought the lot next to us after we moved in here because we thought, having an empty lot next to us that we can turn into something would be fun. And I kind of from the get-go wanted to build a supervillain lair, which means an underground office for myself, basically. But my wife pointed out, it'd be just way cheaper to build you an office above ground on this lot. We could put, lots of trees around it, and it could be a cool little, like, cabin in the woods sort of thing, only without, all the murder. And I said, that's just not, it's not a supervillain lair. Supervillain lair has to be underground. So we dug down 25 feet and built me an office underground that connects to my main house with the tunnel. We had to combine the lots to be able to do that. So, what does it have in it? It has a movie theater. It has an office for me. It has a main room, which is themed as an old-time adventurers club. The idea being that we are going to, when it's finished, find a bunch of cool-looking artifact-type things and put them out on show as if they were discovered by the ancient, or maybe not ancient, the members of the club, the founding members of the club from 200 years ago or whatever, and put really kind of ridiculous descriptions of these objects. It has a fish tank. I did look into a shark tank. Decided not to go Shark Tank direction, even though, frickin' lasers on their frickin' heads would have been cool. Just didn't gel with me, the actual logistics of a Shark Tank, so we went with a pretty cool fish tank instead. This place is not done yet. There are lots of weird things that we need to do to make it work and whatnot. There's a lot of domino effect, right? Like, we want to put the floors in, but the floors are like these special ordered marble things, and so we can't put in the cabinets until the floors are done, and we can't do this until that is done. And since we don't need it to be done to go live in it, like a lot of people's houses, we've just kind of been pokey, as my mother would say, and getting it together. We will do some more pictures in an upcoming newsletter for you guys. It looks much closer to being done than the giant pit that we sent you pictures for before. But yeah, that's some of the stuff that's going to be happening there. How are our cats? So Freya, affectionately known either as Grill Cat or Closet Cat, has almost basically just become a regular house cat. It's quite remarkable. A lot of people online, when we were reading about this, said that if you get a feral as old as she was, which she was like 8 months old when we got her, maybe 10 months, that they will never really come around to being a house cat. But my wife put a lot of time into taming her because we knew with as unsocialized as she was, it was either let her go, fix her and let her go, or take her to the pound and probably never get adopted because she didn't like people. But she didn't bite, she didn't scratch, she just hid. And so my wife charmed her over time by feeding her and petting her, and a year and some months later now, she is basically just a regular cat. She's a little more skittish than Pinecone, Neko, Hello Kitty Chan, Love, Sweetheart, Sparkle, Oliver Sanderson. You added an Oliver to it, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Pinecone, our other cat, which was a stray who moved into our house some 10 years ago now. He is the most lovable cat you'll ever meet. We guess he must have had a family before us because he's fixed, but we could not find this family. And he just really wanted a family, and he still remembers living out on his own. And to this day, he just lets kids pick him up and carry him around. He's like, I don't care. I got a family again. I am so happy. And Freya, she won't let you pick her up. She will, if things are quiet, come over next to you and kind of huddle down and look at you and be like, is this what I'm supposed to do? This is how you cat. And then you will pet her, and she'll be like, yes, I am catting. But then the near it, if a sound happens or something, she'll scramble, run the wrong direction, run into a wall, all sorts of things. She is extremely clumsy, and eventually find a place to hide. She did escape one time outside, which caused quite a bit of panic until we found her under the grill again, in the place where we had found her the first time. Squeezed in there. She's not as small as she was when she first got in there, so we're not sure how she managed to squeeze in there. Unable to get out because she'd gone to the one place that she knew where to hide, and we had to disassemble the grill to pull this cat out. So we don't let her escape outside anymore. So there's Freya for you. She is a very pretty cat, and a very cute cat, and has become a very good member of the family. But just don't try to pick her up. That will cause her to panic.
This one from the chat says, if you had to write a nonfiction book, what topic would it be about?
Writing. I mean,
that was kind of a softball.
Yeah, that is a bit of a softball. I have considered it. One of the reasons I do things like writing excuses in my class is because they use different parts of my brain than writing does. If I sat down to write about writing, I could just be working on one of my stories, most likely. And I'm most likely going to just start doing that because I'm behind on everything. So a writing book is unlikely to happen. But if it did, it would be a writing book and kind of, me talking about motivation and stuff like that, like I talked about earlier, which I don't know if anyone wants to read, but I find very fascinating. So.
This next one from the chat, from Atia Brown, wants to know what is your favorite name you've ever put in a book?
Favorite name I've ever put in a book? Emily, in the dedication to my wife. Another softball.
Nice one.
Yes.
So this one from Facebook, from Brandon Bombard. Says,
Good name, Brandon.
My wife is amazing and accepting of my obsession with your writing, so I'm making a shelf in my bedroom dedicated to you. It will have all of my signed books and any memorabilia I have based on your work. What is something personal you'd like to see on there?
Ooh, let me answer that in a second here. This one, the pen ran out in the middle, so you want to take that.
And the pen's done.
And the pen's done. Give that to somebody, right? It's the one that ran out on screen.
I know Mark wanted one.
Yeah, let's give that to Mark because it's got the kind of one that ran out and stuff like that.
There you go.
So,
You're welcome, Mark.
Yeah. So
He's totally watching.
read that whole question again to me.
My wife is amazing and accepting of my obsession with your writing, so I'm making a shelf in my bedroom dedicated to you. It will have all of my signed books and any memorabilia I have based on your work. What is something personal you'd like to see on there?
Let's see. I'll give you a couple of options. If you're looking for something kind of personal related to me, Dragon's Bane was the book that made me into a writer, by Barbara Hamley. So I'm always happy when people buy copies of Dragon's Bane. In fact, I think I did a foreword to a special edition of that a little while ago, so you could look for that one. And then it belongs on the shelf because I have writing in it. You could put my favorite magic card on there, Vesuvian Doppelganger, which as a young man playing Magic, I always loved clone effects, and I always loved blue cards with too much text that people had to read 3 times to figure out what they did. And Vesuvian Doppelganger is kind of that. Plus, it has just amazing art. Some of the best art in the original Magic set.
This next one is from Hey Boy Brick. If you're done, I'm sorry if I interrupted you.
No, I know.
Okay.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else
Okay.
that would belong there. A salt shaker. Adam is laughing. I salt my food more than most people salt their food. There are 2 things you can call hallmarks to Brandon Sanderson. One is keeping a salt shaker. When I was on Korea serving my mission, they didn't often have salt shakers on the tables, and I always felt a little bit guilty making them run to try to find me salt. So I just carried some salt in my suitcase, and people would always laugh when I would get out my salt shaker, or sometimes just a big thing of Morton salt because I had lost the salt shaker. The other thing you can know as a hallmark of Brandon Sanderson is ice water. I drink ice water. I love ice water with lots of ice. When I go to Europe, it's really rough because if you ask for ice water, they give you like a piece of ice. And this is not what I like in my ice water. I will generally fill it up with ice, and the water only goes to the level of the ice, right? And so I often have to beg and explain to get the European waiters to bring me ice, and they always bring me like a bowl with a spoon for the ice. I'm not sure if that's a mixed drink thing or something. A bowl with this ice with a spoon, maybe for I don't know. But I then take the spoon out, dump the bowl of ice into my cup, and then fill it up with water. So you want a Happy Brandon, a salt shaker, and please don't give me like a billion salt shakers, guys. By the way, I have to say this, or I will go on tour next time, and everyone will bring me salt shakers, and I'll have like 300 of them. I don't need salt shakers. I got lots of salt. But if I go out to dinner with you or something like that, making sure there's a nice big cup of ice will make me happy.
This next one from Hey Boy Brick. First of all, says thank you for Elantris. They're recently started reading it and they're enjoying it.
Well, thank you.
They're looking for suggestions on making time to read.
Oh yeah. So making time to read can be tough, right? Like you would think that I would have a lot of time to read, but I don't read nearly as much as I would like to. Jumping to audiobooks was a big changer for me because I could listen to audiobooks while I was doing other things. And I often find that even if I'm kind of exhausted from the day from writing and not wanting to look at words anymore, an audiobook works differently. So that's the number one piece of advice I could give you is make the jump to audiobooks. There's a reason they've become so popular over the last really 6 or 7 years. The other thing is goals, right? Like I talked about earlier, when I do better reading is when I say, I want to get through this many books or something like that, and I'm going to record my thoughts on them. For me, that can always be good for my career. So I can be like, this is career development, reading these books. And I'm going to read this many, and I'm going to track my progress. That works for me. Tracking my progress on anything makes me more likely to do it.
And Jordan Parrott wants to know what your all-time favorite book is.
All-time favorite book? So usually I give a couple answers to this. Usually I say Dragon's Bane, the book that got me into fantasy, right? It has a special place in my heart. Boy, that went down the wrong pipe. My favorite classic is Les Mis, though I'm also partial to the works of Herman Melville and the works of Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice,
Jane Austen.
Jane Austen, yeah. Also partial to the works of Jane Austen. My favorite Wheel of Time book is Shadow Rising, book 4. So, my favorite author is probably Terry Pratchett. If I need to know I'm going to enjoy a book, I read a Pratchett novel. And my favorite Pratchett is probably Going Coastal, though The Truth is up there as well. So, there's a couple.
Zin the Poet wants to know if that we'll ever see Sixth as a main character again.
I have written the opening to a sequel to Sixth of the Dusk, which I will not call Seventh of the Dusk, though people like to joke about that. Problem is, Sixth of the Dusk takes place far enough forward in the future of the Cosmere that writing stories about him is really tough without giving major spoilers to other Cosmere series. In fact, I wrote this opening, and it has huge spoilers for other Cosmere series. And so the question for myself is, do I try to write around the spoilers, or do I release it with the spoilers, or do I just wait until it's no longer spoilers to release it? I really like the story. The outline for it is sharp. I know where Sixth fits into all of this, even though he was a Discovery-written character. So, yes, most likely you will, but I can't say when exactly.
This next one is from John Van Vutt. I'm saying that name terribly, so I apologize. couldn't get words out. He says, my friend and I are both trying to come up with book ideas and have started plotting, but we both run into the issue of how to come up with an ending. What is your process?
So my process is to plot backward. I start with the ending, and I work my way forward in the outline, and then I write from the beginning toward the end. So I plot backward and I write forward. This works very well for me because having an ending in mind that I'm shooting for is, I found, one of the single best ways to make sure that my book works. It's not a guarantee, but it is one of the best ways. If I am excited to get to this ending that I've planned out ahead of time, it just kind of pulls me through the writing. So for that, how do I come up with those endings? Well, a lot of my stories are based around themes and ideas that I start where I want to be and I work backward to earn that. So it's very natural to me. May not be natural to you. For a lot of my friends who are more inclined toward discovery writing, figuring out an ending is a lot harder. I have had friends write the whole book up to the ending, then brainstorm with their writing group what the ending should be, and then put that ending in. I have had friends who have just written a poor ending on it, given it to a bunch of different readers to get feedback, and tried to really kind of then ascertain what the promises they're making are. Boy, I wish I could give you more advice than this. The problem is, the best advice I can give you right now, if you haven't finished a lot of things, is to write anyway. It's because finishing books is the best way to learn how to finish books. And even if your first few do not end spectacularly, you can fix that in revision. Don't worry about that. And you will learn how to come up with endings by writing books. My first book that I tried writing, which has never been released, had a terrible ending. Just an awful ending. I obviously was not doing what I do now then, but I don't think I could have, because until I had written a few books, I didn't realize how to weave things together. So give it a try. Just write it. You can always fix it. If you don't have an ending in mind, at least try to come up with a character arc while you're writing. Some way the character can change through the course of the story, coming to a culmination, and then you can overlap your plot ending with that eventually. I did do my first lecture my second lecture this year for the BYU class on plotting, and that should go up in a couple of weeks. So hopefully that will help you. You can watch that one. It will be on this channel, right? Yeah, Adam says yes.
This next one is from Twitter, from @Timberwolves. I don't think the basketball team. It says, does the term Bright Lord brightness have only to do with eye color, or is it related to the fact that money and artificial light are synonymous?
So, yes. The problem here answering is, does it have only to do with eye color? No, of course not. But eye color and the fact that money glows are both things that have been themes in boring culture for thousands of years now, and because of that, the two are very closely interlinked, and it'd be hard to pick which one is causing this and pull the other one out. So it is both. If you were to ask a Lethe, they would probably say it has more to do with eye color, but culturally, the fact that money glows is just really deeply embedded into the way they think about light and the way they think about wealth and that sort of thing.
This next one is from Facebook, from Mike Schaefer. It says, is your approach to writing novellas, in-depth outlines and book guides, etc., the same as for novels, but less voluminous? How does your process differ for shorter works?
So, yes, for novellas, it is basically the same process, Mike. I will generally just try to outline one plot cycle with maybe one or two subplots, as opposed to for a novel where we're looking at a large number of plot cycles and subplots and things like that. And a novella, for me, really is just a short novel. Writing a short story is a different process entirely. For me, the few that I've written, which have not been a ton, have been more discovery written. And less planning and more revision on the backside. So, yeah, there you go.
This one is from the chat from Cupcake Unleashed. Says, Brandon, I've almost finished a fantasy and I'm up to 70,000 words, but I feel like I've repeated a lot of things throughout. For example, characters training for chapters. How would you fix such a problem?
Ooh, good question. So I would go through and I would trim. If you think you've been repetitious, if you think that there are problems with that sort of thing, and that's very common. My books get way better after I cut 10% off of them, which I usually do as one of the final revisions that I do. And it sounds like you could cut more than 10%. If that drops it so low that you're worried that it fits as a novel, well, you could either try to publish it as a novella, or you could add a second viewpoint arc to the story, or something along those lines. You could expand one of the subplots by adding some chapters here and there. But I would say that most readers, if not all, would rather read a tight book that is shorter than one that fits the traditional definition of length of what a novel should be, but has lots of filler. And learning how to cut that filler out is going to be one of the best things you can do in practicing your revision. So go take the hacksaw to it and cut it down.
This one is from Aaron from Twitter. It says, what changes, if any, would you like to see in the fantasy genre for this upcoming new decade?
Ooh, boy. I get asked questions like this on occasion, and I do have trouble answering because if there are changes I want to see, I just kind of do them in my writing, and it's hard for me to feel that I should speak for an entire genre, particularly one so varied as fantasy. I have been very interested by some of the trends that have been happening lately in fantasy. I think fantasy has gone some really interesting places with different types of stories and different types of backgrounds leading to fantasy novels. I would certainly like to see that continue. It's been very good for the genre, I believe. But I don't have really any axes to grind about where the fantasy genre should go, which is very different for me now than when I was young and trying to break in. Maybe that simply comes down to the fact that right now I am the establishment rather than the person looking to buck the establishment. And so for someone like me, the fantasy genre seems like it's in a great place because people are buying my books. But when I was younger, I also, I don't want to say I was more self-righteous, but I think in my desire to see my style of fantasy do better, I was less willing to acknowledge that that as far as taste goes, doesn't matter what you love in stories within normal limits, as long as they are books that people are writing with passion and that you're enjoying reading, right? So when I was younger, I might have said, there are too many Tolkien-esque fantasies being published. Where now I say, hey, people, they like Tolkien-esque fantasies. That's great. Everybody loves Tolkien. So what's wrong with fantasy being Tolkien-esque if people enjoy it? So I'm much less likely to try to say what fantasy should be, and just more enjoying the fact that I feel like we have in fantasy the single most interesting and diverse genre on the face of the planet. It is the genre where anything can happen and your imagination is unlimited. And I love that about the genre, and I certainly would like to see that continue and to see where it goes.
From the chat, Jim Roberts says, Brandon, what difficulties did you face in using the magic systems of the Wheel of Time, and what magic systems do you find particularly interesting to utilize in your writing?
So, difficulties with the Wheel of Time. So, Wheel of Time magicism sits in a very interesting place in the history of epic fantasy, in my opinion. It is during this kind of transitional phase between very Tolkien inspired fantasies being the best-selling fantasies, and the George Martin era of low magic and grittiness kind of being injected into fantasy. With the asterisk that people were doing gritty fantasy before George, and George would be the first to admit this. I mean, what was Elric if not grimdark 20 years before people started coining the phrase? But Robert Jordan sits at that really interesting bridge. You can see the early Wheel of Time books are very Tolkien influenced, and by about book 4, they go in a very distinctive direction. Because of this, the magic of Wheel of Time, I also feels like it straddles between a hard rule-based magic and a softer magic, in that it has a lot of the hallmarks of a very rule-based magic. It has lots of visual components or other sensory components to it, like the weaves being visible, rather than kind of the classic soft magic like Gandalf, where he's doing something, but you don't know what he's doing because it's not very visual necessarily. It has a scientific sort of side to it where people talk about it in ways that are analytic. And it has the classic hallmark of a rule-based or a hard magic, in that it has main characters learning to use the magic and finding out about all its quirks and difficulties and overcoming them and learning to use the magic through experimenting. But it also has a few soft magic hallmarks, such as never quite being sure what the limits of the magic are, and the characters constantly finding new weaves that undermine everything they thought they understood about it. It does kind of fall into the soft magic, the classic soft magic method of new powers are developed in moments of great tension, such as Rand discovering, Avienda discovering traveling, right? During a moment of great tension and things like this. This is a hallmark of a soft magic, a magic that you aren't sure exactly what it can do. And I would say my difficulties in writing it were that balance is not necessarily my forte. I feel like I can be pretty good with a fully soft magic or pretty good with a mostly hard magic, but the middle ground is a bit more of a danger area for me, where I don't feel like I'm as comfortable or as skilled at it. And so I treated the Wheel of Time magic more like a hard magic, meaning I tried to resist inventing new weaves, and instead took the weaves that existed and tried to see where I could extrapolate. I often use Andrel as my example of the kind of blowing off steam character, whose job was to act as a pressure valve for me, so that I could put all of my wacky ideas that I had had since I was a kid reading The Wheel of Time, that what I would do with gateways, into one character to kind of contain them, so to speak. But I would say that's the thing. I wanted to be very careful not to invent too many new weaves, because I felt like I was not as comfortable with that as Robert Jordan was.
From the chat, Noah Del Grosso asks if you have a favorite chapter that you've written or a chapter you're most proud of.
Ooh, this gets into the old question of favorites that is tough for me to answer, because as far as writing goes, my favorites tend to be what I'm working on at the moment, and my least favorite tends to be whatever I'm revising at the moment. And I tend to look at my books all like one might look at their children, in that they all have really interesting and cool aspects to them. And it's not that I have favorites, it's that I like them all for different reasons. The book I am most proud of is A Memory of Light, because it was the hardest book to write by far, followed by Mistborn 2 in my career. And of the scenes in that one, is there one I'm more proud of than another? I don't know. Probably not. I would say the scene I'm probably most proud of in The Wheel of Time is Veins of Gold from Gathering Storm, which was kind of the culmination of a very risky sequence of plot lines that I had to convince Team Jordan belonged in the series, and was also, when it worked, me kind of proving to them that I could do risky things with the Wheel of Time that I sincerely believe Robert Jordan would have done risky things with the Wheel of Time. None of his books happened that major game-changing events or character moments didn't occur. And my biggest worry for writing the Wheel of Time books is that they would play it safe, that mine would just be safe, that they would just be paint by numbers, whatever I expect to happen, happen. And I didn't want to do that. And the two sequences I pitched that were kind of my proof that my attempt to prove that I could do this were Veins of Gold, the thing that ends there, and Avienda and the Glass Pillars of Viridian. Those were both very risky sequences to put in the books. Risky in that there's a chance that if written poorly, they would fall on their face and would end up then doing a different sort of problem, which is that instead of feeling too safe, the books don't feel like Wheel of Time books. That is the big danger, which is, by the way, why Harriet decided at the end that we should cut the Bayo sequence from A Memory of Light for that very reason. That was one of the risky things that I did. At the end of the day, they decided that if we published it, it would feel too out of place in the Wheel of Time. And I think she was right. But it's very hard to see that as an author in the middle of it, which is why having great editors is so important. So there you go. Veins of Gold, maybe Veins of Gold.
This one's from Dina Whitney. Why aren't there more pets in your worlds, and in the future, or will we get more in the future books?
So one of the reasons there aren't more pets is because my main series is the Stormlight Archive, and there's just not room for both spren as companions and pets, right? Like, they kind of fulfill a similar role. And you could say for the same reason, we don't have them in Elantris, and in Mistborn, we basically have Orisir the Wolfhound filling that role. And so I've kind of slotted into that role in the story these sapient companions to the main characters. And they're just too many things to juggle sometimes by adding too many even characters that are obviously just pets into stories. Now, that doesn't mean I won't do it now and then, but yeah, that's the main reason you're not seeing as many. But I mean, you could argue that that the AVR are pets, but you could also argue that they're not, that they are these sapient companions, because AVR have more than animal intelligence. But at least I've written a couple stories with pet-like entities.
This one from Twitter from Eric Culver says, how do you feel about fans naming their kids after your characters? My wife knows 2 people with kids named Kaladin.
I find it a mark of great respect and honor that people are naming kids after my characters. It also means that maybe some of my names aren't that terrible. That's my very first book, Elantris, when I published it. Elantris was the book where I kind of went out there with my linguistics, and several of the reviewers noticed, they're like, these names are just so hard to say and so weird. Sanderson needs to calm down on the naming. And so when people name their kids after characters, then I'm like, oh good, at least they're not so weird that people won't name their kids after them. It's really cool. I remember when I met my first Rand, or my first parent, which both happened before I was working on the Wheel of Time, and so that's always been really cool to me. I like it. I like meeting Arwyns, right? I wish that fantasy names were a little more, little more frequent in our society. I think that they're very cool. So it's awesome. I will try to live up to the respect you have shown me by naming children after my characters.
This one from the chat from William Brown says, I understand you had the vision of the Stormlight Archive a long time, but how did you ever think it would be, or did you ever think it would be as popular as it is?
No. In fact, I shared a story, I believe, on the last stream about how writing the first version of The Way of Kings was me giving up on getting published because I didn't think people wanted to read what I wanted to write at all. And so it kind of comes down to an adage I talk about with my students. The Way of Kings is my least accessible book, right? Like, if you're gonna pile all of my novels together and ask which is the one that is the hardest to get into, the least likely to draw a wide fan base and broad appeal, it's going to be The Way of Kings. So why is The Way of Kings my most popular? By a very narrow margin. Mistborn and Way of Kings tend to go back and forth on which is the most popular, but I would say Way of Kings is the most popular. Why is it? Well, it's because something a little more niche, done really well and with a lot of passion, does tend to create a better piece of art in my experience. This goes counter to perhaps the Hollywood philosophy of getting the biggest and widest fan base that you can, which certainly has worked for some properties, right? But my experience has been do your thing and do it well, and understand that a story you're writing might have certain limitations in audience, but when you trade limitations in audience for something niche done very well, it can be a very good trade-off sometimes. Why is Way of Kings the most difficult to get into and the least broad appealing of my books? Well, it's because it throws a lot of characters at you very quickly. It has a very steep learning curve. It is in a world that is very different from ours and requires a lot more words of explanation. And it starts off with a kick to the face in Kaladin's early story. Why is Way of Kings so successful? Because the world building, though hard to get into, is distinctive and therefore memorable. Because Kaladin's plot, because it is so excruciating at times, later on I am able to make those plot cycles that much more powerful because of the things that are happening early in the story. Are we okay, Adam?
Yeah, it's just I got a low power warning on my phone.
Oh, okay. Low power warning on the phone.
Don't know why it's plugged in, but...
The fact that it has a lot of scope and a lot of different characters and things like that is also a selling point, despite it making for a much more difficult learning curve. And so, because of that, the things that are indeed the thing that is holding the story back from holding a big audience, perhaps a bigger audience, is also the thing that makes the audience that do discover it love it that much more. And this is a very common I think, in art. And so it's a reason to just write to your passions. It doesn't mean don't consider what is marketable and what's not, but it also means going into the stories you write, being aware of what you're trying to do. I never thought Stormlight would be this successful, but by the time I was writing Stormlight, I didn't care, right? I knew success for myself was gauged in how satisfied I was with the story that I was trying to write, and that market success was not something I could depend on or even influence that much. So the fact that it's turned out well for me, I chalk up to great blessings and or luck, and I am extremely grateful that it has gone as well as it has. And I intend to keep on doing what I'm doing because people seem to enjoy it.
From Facebook, Fernando Gonsalves says, Dear Brandon, as someone who will try to submit my first book to editors this year, I am a lot more confident in my story and plot than my writing skill of each individual scene. I have two questions. Do you think I should save some of my best ideas for later or try to go all out and give everything I got for each book? Did you have any similar fears when starting?
What excellent questions. First of all, congratulations. Finishing and submitting your first book is actually the biggest and most difficult hurdle in your career. Now, there are still some pretty big hurdles. Getting a book accepted and then having that book sell are pretty big hurdles. But if you're going to look at, in my opinion, the number of people who say they want to write novels compared to the number of people who have finished a novel, you have already made the biggest and most difficult cut that you will make in your whole career. So congratulations. My general advice is not to hold anything back. I have found that an author who trains themselves to give their all to each story works a little bit like a well, meaning you think you're going to run out of water in the well by drawing so much out so quickly for this story, but it turns out the well will refill, and if you hadn't done that, it means that each story you write might have 1 or 2 great ideas, where instead it could have 10 or 12 great ideas. Generally, having too many ideas is not a problem. Now, once in a while I meet a writer who's trying to pack too much into a story. It does happen, and in that case, you may want to learn to space things out. My original draft of Way of Kings, which I've mentioned, the 2002 version, I tried to do 10 different character storylines basically at once. And I have to go back and see if it was actually 10. But too many stories, right? And what ended up happening is I got like 20% through each of these stories rather than actually giving a satisfying conclusion to any of them. And when I rewrote Way of Kings, focusing on 3 people, Kaladin, Shallan, and Dalinar, and made sure they each had a satisfying resolution to the story that they were part of, the book worked way better. So it is occasionally possible to put too much in, but for now, I would recommend give your all to every book. Do not hold the best parts back for future books, and make sure each book is the best book you could write at that time.
This next one from the chat from Niccolo Mariani says, what book series would you like most to see as a video game, as a movie, and as a TV series in that order?
All right. So
and I don't know if that's specifically your books or books at large.
Books, I'll do both, right? I'll do both. So my books, film, I would pick Mistborn. Video game, I would pick Mistborn. Television series, I would pick Way of Kings. I think that's pretty easy. I think Mistborn is the only one of my epic fantasies that lends itself best to a film format. That doesn't mean it couldn't make a great series, and if the right opportunity comes along, I would go that direction. But since it is the only one that looks like it could make a really great series or feature, because it sells a self-contained story in a feature-level scope, it is the one I would choose. It also has the mechanics that would work best, in my opinion, for a video game. I would love to see Elemancy, and in fact, I tried very hard to get a video game made many years ago with a wonderful partner, Matt Scott, who did some really great work on it, but it just never quite came together. Stormlight would be very difficult to adapt as a feature film. It needs a little more time. It has so much going on and so many characters that it feels like what is going on right now with The Witcher or with what happened with Game of Thrones would be the right medium for Stormlight. Not mine. Let's see. Feature film. What do I most want to see as a feature film from things? I am shocked and surprised we don't have an Anne McCaffrey feature film series based on Dragon Drives Return. It seems like it would just be awesome. I know that's been in the works multiple times. I would have said Ender's Game, but we got one of those, and it didn't adapt quite as well as I thought it would, so I might be wrong on all this. Television show, Name of the Wind, most likely. I think that what Pat is doing is really cool and would make an excellent television show, and I know that they have one in the works with Lin-Manuel Miranda, so that looks really good. That's a nice pairing. Pat and Lin-Manuel Miranda seem like they are very well matched and suited to each other. So what would make the best video game, though, that hasn't been made into a video game yet? Whew, that one's rough. Book to video game is tough, let me tell you. Knowing some people in the video game business, it is just a very hard sell. There is only really one Witcher, where a book became a really good video game series, whereas most others that have been tried have been some measure of failure, but yeah. We've already had a Dune video game, several of them, so I can't say Dune. We've already had a Wheel of Time video game, so that's already been done. Maybe a Wheel of Time MMO. Wheel of Time MMO. Make it happen. There you go.
Cool.
Sony has the rights, right? Sony does MMOs. Slam dunk.
From the chat, Sir Rick the Nick wants to know what your favorite food is.
My favorite food is, like actual dinner food, is probably some variation on mac and cheese. I like a cheeseburger mac a lot. I like a lasagna a lot. I like a regular mac and cheese. Snack food would be popcorn. And I would rank popcorn probably as my favorite food of all. I like popcorn in all its varieties except kettle corn. You can give me caramel corn and I'm okay. You can give me popcorn and I'm okay. But when you start mixing the two and I reach for a handful of juicy, salty, buttery popcorn, and instead it's covered in salt or covered in sugar, then you have played a prank on me of the highest degree.
Laura Picton has a question that many people are asking right now.
Okay.
They just want another introduction to what you're signing.
Oh yes, if you came in a little bit later. So what we're signing are, so this is what we call a signature page, right? Not because we sign on it, right? It's called a signature. I guess a signature page, but it's called a signature. So when you get a book, what happens is, one of these big things is folded like this and then sliced and then bound into the book along this thing. And you can kind of go look. Books are made up of signatures. These ones, 16 pages is what makes up most signatures. And so we are doing a big Kickstarter to do the Way of Kings leatherbound this summer. We decided we wanted to try Kickstarter because we're worried Way of Kings is going to be popular enough that it will be beyond our ability and scope to deal with normally. And so I am signing 10,000 of these. We normally sell between 3,000 and 5,000 of leatherbounds, and we just have a feeling that more people are going to want the Stormlight archive. So what we found in the past is we would order them in, get them, and the books would come. Do you want to grab one, Kara? This box? The books would come in these awesome boxes, right? Like from the printer. She's going to get one of the war breakers we have here. And they would be all shrink wrapped and boxed inside of this really easy to ship box. This is what it looks like, by the way. It's gorgeous. I gotta show you guys. Yeah, if you haven't seen these end pages by Dan Dos Santos, they're so gorgeous. But then we would open up every one of these, take off the shrink wrapping, and then I would sign them, and then we would ship them out. And we had, number one, it was really labor intensive, and number two, we were much more likely to ding them up or whatnot, and then have to replace the book because, getting it out, unwrapping it, moving it around, just ended up causing more wear and tear on the books than we wanted for such a high quality product. So instead, we decided I would sign them all and then these would be bound into the books. However, the most of the time when people do a pre-signed thing like this, they just get a sheet of paper, sign it, and then it gets bound in the front, and it just doesn't look right. I don't know if you've ever gotten one of those, but the signature, I like when my books that I buy from people, I like when the signature's like on the title page, right? Like it's right in there. And I don't like it when the signature's on its own page, sitting there by itself, looking very much like what happened, where it was a huge stack of them were signed and bound to the book. I know some people are like, oh man, I would like the idea that Brandon has held the book, not just one piece of it. But there were so many damaged books the other way that we decided to start doing this. They send me all of the first signature, and then I sign all of those, and we send them off to the printer, and the printer binds them into the books, and then they come to us in that nice wrapping, and we can just ship them right off, and it's great. So that's what I'm doing. We are going to be sending these off. You said the 25th is when you want these sent off. How many more do we have?
You're on stack 5 of 25.
5 of 25 that were left?
Yes.
Okay. So, I'm on stack 5 out of 25. So now, we might be in here again this week, answering more questions for you, because I doubt I'm going to get through all 25 tonight.
This next one from the chat from Toilet Porpoise Productions
Ooh, that's a good name.
wants to know who your favorite nonfiction author is.
Boy, do I have a favorite nonfiction author? Moses? Joking. I really like Mary Roach's books. They're a lot of fun. I really like, I don't know, can I say Dan Carlin? Hardcore History is my favorite podcast, and it reads like an audiobook. I don't know if he writes scripts for it first, though. But you guys who listen to Hardcore History know what I mean. They're like, it's a podcast, except each episode is 4 hours, and like part 1 of 5, and so they're like 25-hour podcasts. And he's great. I really like Dan Carlin. Malcolm Gladwell is always entertaining. I realize that sometimes people dispute his conclusions, but both him and the Freakonomics guys, as kind of pop science where economics goes, I really enjoy. I think they can put together a really solid story or a really solid narrative out of nonfiction. I think I mentioned it last time, but if not, the most recent nonfiction book that I read and really liked was Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull. I listened to the audiobook. It was really cool. It is the history of Pixar as told through the management side, not the creative side, which is just a different, interesting perspective.
This next one from the chat from Glenn Casterjean. In order to avoid spoilers, I'm going to edit the question and say, where did you get or research addiction? And what made you put a character into your books who's battling addiction?
So this character that is battling addiction was actually started in, first appearance was in Mythwalker, which is the book that became Warbreaker. It was my 9th novel. During those days, for those who don't know, I wrote 13 before I sold one. This character really stuck with me. It was that me trying to do something that is very different from my own personal experience, looking to try to make a character sympathetic who struggles with something that a lot of people struggle with in our world. And one of my goals in putting characters like this into my books is to try to help humanize, because we all have these issues we deal with, and we all have different things to our psychology, and some of them can be pretty difficult to deal with. Some mental illness can just be a real kick to the head. And I see a lot of fiction that does a poor job of humanizing people like this. And this was a character that when I wrote him, I didn't know what I was doing, but the character really connected with me. And so I put the character back in. I added them to the Stormlight archive. And then I started to do my research. You can read in the acknowledgments some of the people that have been very helpful in me understanding addiction to the point that I hope I can get it right in the stories. But it was really important to me. There was something about writing this character that made me understand addiction and people who were dealing with addiction in a way I hadn't before. And that's something that I love about writing. And so, the other thing is I didn't want magic to become a panacea to get rid of hard things in people's lives. That's kind of important to me, because I think it could be very dangerous to write, well, the way to get over this sort of thing is just to get some magical powers, which of course doesn't work in the real life, in the real world. And I don't want to not give people who deal with things like this the escapism that some of us will get by being able to read a book about someone who has a magical cure to an affliction they're dealing with. That is part of why we read, is this sort of this ability to escape from our problems into a world where the problems become different and perhaps more surmountable. I acknowledge that what I'm doing does make that difficult, but I feel like the humanizing of people who are maybe not psychonormative or who deal with serious issues like addiction is more important to me, and the writing felt right. At the end of the day, you know, there's all these reasons that we can give for why I do things that are intellectual reasons, but at the end of the day, it just feels right. The characters I'm writing feel like themselves, and that's who they are. And to not write them well would be a betrayal of trying to tell this character story.
So I just want to warn people there might be a little interruption in sound because I'm not getting enough power, so I'm going to take off that adapter. But I'm going to ask you the next question so you can answer.
Well, if there's a sound
Well, I'm just going to be unplugging that and plugging that back
okay.
in. So.
All right, and we'll get the next question, but there's a short interruption, then, yeah.
Then I'm sorry. This question is from Finarfin the Elf. Says, is asking for any specific techniques you use when researching for books.
Okay.
Let's hope that saves the battery.
All right. So this is a test. Will you guys please tell Adam in the chat if the sound is still working? So research. I'm sorry to those who have heard me say this many times, but there's a good rule of thumb for a writer. And this is you can't become an expert in everything that you want to become an expert in and still have time to write. You can become an expert in a few things, certainly, that can become very important and powerful parts of your writing. But at the end of the day, being a writer is about being a jack of all trades and being able to pretend you know more than you do. How do we do this? Well, start with things that are interesting to you. If you're researching a topic, make sure you're finding something that you find really interesting. This can start as a pop science book on the topic. You don't feel like you have to go straight into PhD dissertations about the topic. Reading and searching for popular blogs that deal with the topic. Basically, all the stuff that you wouldn't want to use for your research paper actually becomes a good starting point for a writer. Because it can start to tell you how people actually deal with this topic in the real life, in the real world. It can start to give you an idea of how characters will be influenced about it. You do not have to have PhD level knowledge in these things to write about them. You're going to have to appear that you do eventually. And how do you do that? You start with the easy stuff. You dig a little bit into the meat, enough that you're not going to make a fool of yourself. You then write your story and you get some experts. And you get those experts to read your writing, either by giving them the book early. In my case, a lot of people are very eager to read the book early. Some people we hire who have very specialized expertise. And you say, all right, tell me where I'm wrong. And these experts can give you an idea of where you're wrong. And if you've done the first part right, you won't be way off most of the time. Once in a while you will. But most of the time you will not be way off. And this will let the person who is who's giving you feedback correct you to give you that extra little oomph of expertise to make it really work. What you're searching for here is plausibility to the point that someone who knows this topic, who reads your book, won't be kicked out of the book most of the time. Now, once in a while there's a topic that you're going to dig into deeply in your story, and it's going to become the crux of your story. Like, for instance, if you're writing a John Grisham type legal thriller, I would not recommend you only touch lightly on legal expertise, right? But if you're writing a fantasy novel that includes one courtroom scene that you want to be really accurate, but the rest of the book doesn't hinge on your knowledge of law, at that point you can get some attorneys to be your beta readers to help you touch up that scene and make it right. So I guess it kind of comes down to your goal. And my goal most of the time is to not kick out of the story the people who know this topic better than I do, For instance, with Kaladin's field medicine, I don't have time to go to med school, but I can get myself close enough that I can get someone with a medical background to read the book and tell me what I've done wrong. So how are we doing? Did they say the sound works?
Yeah, sound is working great.
Okay.
I'm going to check the power in a second, but I'm going to give you another question. This one is from Facebook, from Kim Jensen. Says, recently I seem to somehow have gotten the braking talent. I have literally destroyed 2 blenders and the bumper on my car all within a week. Any advice about how to channel my newfound power for good?
Oh yeah, you are just screaming to be carrying me to write stories. If you guys haven't read it, Alcatraz has the breaking talent in the Alcatraz books, my middle grade series. And this is a kid that's just magically good at breaking things. That just came because my mother, during a certain period back then, was complaining that everything she touched broke. And I channeled her frustration into a novel. And that's where a lot of book ideas come from me. If somebody's really frustrated by something, it can be very dangerous to have authors as friends, because you will say, my life is so frustrating, and they'll be like, ooh, tell me more about this thing that is ruining your life so that I can make use of it. Somebody asked me to do the Mr. Burns look so. Excellent. How's that? Is that, yeah, I didn't hunch enough. Excellent, Smithers. I saw someone ask me to do that on Facebook. So
either that or sing the Witcher song.
Sing the Witcher song, yes. I'll do. I'm much more of a Mr. Burns than I am a Witcher. So we'll go with that.
This next one is from Facebook as well, from Brian Doble. He says, hello. Within the last 5 years, you have become my absolute favorite author. I was wondering if you are a fan of dwarves. They are my favorite fantasy race, and I just feel like they have been lacking in fantasy in books of late.
Yes, I enjoy dwarves. But at the same time, you will find a lot of my generation got a little over Tolkien'd when we were younger. This is why you don't see a lot of Tolkien-esque races in my books. This is just because this is me armchair philosophy. I don't think this is hard, fast law of how the history of fantasy went, but feels like Tolkien did something really cool in writing Lord of the Rings. Invented a new genre, epic fantasy, right? I haven't really been able to find, before Tolkien, somebody who wrote a book like he did that took place in a completely secondary world. Almost always, or every time I've seen, I'm sure that you might be able to find something, but everything I've seen took place either in the prehistory of our world, like Conan, or took place with people from our world traveling to another world, like Narnia. And in doing what he did, it feels like he was 20 or 30 years ahead of his time, and he released this awesome thing. And the rest of science fiction fantasy said, that is incredible. We want to do this too. And so Grandpa Tolkien really started a genre, launched an entire genre. And then he had the gall to go and die on us and not release anymore. And so what happened in the post-Tolkien world was you got a lot of things like Terry Brooks' wonderful sort of genre books, and David Eddings, who famously said in an interview, they came to him, Lester Del Rey I think it was, and said, hey, this Tolkien stuff is doing really well. Can you do something like this? He had not been a fantasy writer before that. He'd been writing thrillers, and they're like, hey, write this. If you haven't heard of David Eddings, he was one of the big selling fantasy authors of the 80s. And you even had people like Guy Gavriel Kay, who is, in my opinion, one of the greatest living fantasy authors. His early trilogy had some very Tolkien-esque features to it, and some very Arthurian, which was another common theme back then. But, you know, that's to be expected. Guy Gavriel Kay was Christopher Tolkien's friend in college, and he had something to do with the Silmarillion that he is unable to tell the rest of us what exactly it was. But Tolkien-esque fantasies really lasted all the way up until the mid-90s. They were the dominant form. You had things like Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever, which was very Tolkien-inspired, but of course taken this kind of dark direction. You had Terry Brooks, who was basically writing kind of YA adventure fiction in a Tolkien-esque world. Same with Same with David Eddings, though he didn't use the elves and dwarves. He kind of used the Tolkien-esque plots and things like that. But my generation who grew up reading those said, wow, those are really good. Tad Williams' Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn is fantastic. Very Tolkien-inspired, but fantastic. What else can be done with this genre? And so you see us all writing and trying to kind of get out from underneath Tolkien, from in Tolkien's shadow. And my generation of fantasy writers reacted very kind of strongly against Tolkien-esque stuff, not because we don't like it, but because it's being covered real well. And I suspect that there is another wave of writers out there who watched the Tolkien movies, and that brought them into fantasy, and they are reacting toward Tolkien instead of away from Tolkien. And so I think there are things to find out there that are Tolkien-esque. David, what's his name? He's a self-published author on Amazon who writes some very interesting orc books that I know a lot of people really like, that are compared very favorably to the Drizzt novels. David Dagladish. I'm sorry, David, if you end up watching this for some reason.
David Dalglish?
Dalglish. I have friends who really speak highly of those books, so maybe they will have the Tolkien-esque sort of things in Dwarves that you want. And of course, video games and pop media like that often have the Tolkien-esque races. You are unlikely to see them in my books, just because of my heritage, my reading heritage, and where I decided to go in the genre.
This one from Twitter, from Bruno Vale Fernandez, says, which character had an easy concept but was harder to translate onto paper?
Ooh, let me see. Easy concept, hard to translate to paper. Sazed was harder to translate to paper, and I often go back to him because his arc in the third Mistborn book is one of the hardest that I've ever written. Took a lot of revision, and on paper, it was pretty easy. Character gets depression because everything he's believed in turns out to potentially be a sham. Slight spoiler there, hopefully not too big of one. That is really hard to write. Turns out that a mental affliction that encourages you to not get out of bed, not do anything, and tries to push you to be inactive, meshes really poorly with trying to write characters in a novel. Getting depression right can often be soul-crushing for the reader and really boring, which is quite a challenge because we do want to get it right if we're going to include characters with depression. But at the same time, a person who has trouble getting out of bed every day can just be can wear on you to read. And it's one of those things where being realistic adds a whole host of challenges. And my advice, if you are doing this, is to make sure that there is some either external force forcing them to keep going, or some sort of sense of progression, even if it's downward progression, that the reader can watch and feel a sense of motion to the character's arc.
This one from the chat, from Aurora, says, if you had to choose a creature from Rosharan to be your pet, what would it be? And they are hoping for something cooler than an X sound.
It would be a Larkin, obviously. This is the little beastie that was given to Rysson in the second book. They are very cool in that they feed on investiture, and that turns out to be a really handy power to have. If you're not going to have magic of your own in the Cosmere, then having the ability to eat other people's magic is really handy. Plus, they're the closest thing that I've had appear on screen in a non-humanoid form to a dragon so far in the books. They're little lizard wasp dragons. Wasp dragon, I would say, is what a Larkin is. And that would be a really cool thing to have. So.
This one from Dylan in the chat. If you could have one of your characters made as an android and unleashed upon the world, who would it be?
Unleashed upon the world. That's an interesting phrasing. made as an android and unleashed upon the world.
Almost sounds like the Lord Ruler would fit there.
Unleash a lift upon the world and see what she does.
Okay. This next one from Facebook from David Gelber says, Brandon, if you could visit any period in history and speak to any person in history, where would you go and to whom would you speak?
Assuming that language barrier was not an issue, I would go back and listen to the Sermon on the Mount and its original language. That one is not very hard for me to choose. It would be pretty awesome. Plus, free fish and bread.
And you love your fish.
Yeah, I actually hate fish, but I would eat it. Miracle fish. It's going to turn into little bumper stickers for millions of people in the future, so I'd eat my fish and be happy.
So this next one from Facebook from Chris Honora says, beyond growing your writing skills, how have the stories you have written challenged or changed you personally? Which characters and stories have most inspired you beyond words on a page?
Boy, that one is a tough one to answer because any way I can answer it feels like I'm patting myself on the back. I've been asked similar questions to this before. It's like, look how great a job I did with this character. I'm so inspiring because I write such inspiring characters. It's really hard to talk about because my natural sort of sense of I don't get to decide what's inspiring, the reader does. I just get to try to write my characters. But the ones that have changed me the most tend to be the characters who are most different from me in viewpoint. That's a little bit of a misspeaking, though, because as I often say, almost every character is a mesh of something I do and something that is very different from me. A piece of me and a piece of someone else, or someone I would like to try to be. And so, writing Sazed's journey through the Mistborn books was probably one of the most interesting to me, because it has kind of some religious significance and things like that. But I don't know if I can really say that I'm inspired by my own characters. More, I am trying to be inspiring by taking my lived experience and then trying to see through the eyes of a character and create a new lived experience for myself as I live through their eyes.
This next one from Twitter from Darcy Cole.
Hey, Darcy.
Says, hi, Brandon. Can you talk about your outline to draft process? For example, if you know you need a scene to accomplish X, Y, and Z goals, how do you decide where, how, what's happening in the scene to accomplish those goals? Is it a trial and error, instinct, practice?
So, for those who don't know, Darcy is in my writing group. Thanks for seeding the chat with questions, Darcy. Wait, no.
This is Twitter.
Twitter. No, this is the other Darcy. This is
Darcy,
Beta Reader
Beta.
Darcy. Sorry, I was thinking Darcy Stone. This is Beta Reader Darcy, who you can find in the acknowledgments of several of our books. So Darcy, thank you for seeding the chat with cool questions. A lot of this does come down to experience. I will admit. That's the kind of dirty secret of all writing advice is, after doing this for a long time, these things start to happen by instinct, and then you try to explain what's going on. That instinct takes place because I am working along with my characters as I go through the story, trying to be them and live their experience, which is kind of cheating because I know where they're going. So, how do I decide where an event needs to go? Most of the time, I try it out, then I read it in its place, and I decide if it was too early or too late. And I will then move it. I just moved a chapter up in Stormlight 4 today. One of the interludes, every Stormlight book has an interlude character that gets 4 interludes, kind of as a mini novella in the center of the book. And I cut one of this character's viewpoints and moved the one before up because their plot felt too slow. And I needed to have what was happening chapters later to come up right here, and that means I need to write something new to go into other places of that chapter. And the truth is, this is just done by instinct. Instinct for pacing, instinct for where things need to go in order to set off the right domino effect. comes from writing lots of books and having many books not work and asking yourself, why didn't that work? And then having other ones actually work and asking yourself, why did they work? That's kind of a non-answer for you, Darcy, I'm afraid, but it's the best I can do at this point.
This one from the chat, from Untamed Banana, says they're very curious about who writes the Ars Arcanum.
Ars Arcanum are all written by Chris. She's a character from White Sand, which was my first novel. Never got published, but we did the graphic novel versions of it. She appears on screen at a party with Wax in the third Wax and Wayne book, I believe. She dances with him. It's either the second or the third. I think it's the third. So.
This one from Tachanga's LMG says, quick question about writing. Do you worry about sounding like other writers when it comes to plot and magic systems? If so, how do you get over that fear and separate yourself?
Yeah, this is something that I do worry about. I worried about it more earlier in my career, before I really had enough practice under my belt that I felt I had a style of my own. But even still, you worry as a writer that you are just a hack who is copying other people rather than coming up with things of your own. This is, I think, you can't silence this voice completely, but you can counteract it by saying your experience is going to be what makes that the story feel original. And most of the time, you are worrying about this more than your reader will notice. Been my experience with both my works and my friends' work who've all worried about this. The times when I worry about it are if I give the book to beta readers or alpha readers and they start saying, this feels an awful lot like X. And sometimes I don't change it. If it feels an awful lot like X, and I haven't ever read X, then, well, great minds think alike. If it feels a lot like X, and I have read X, then sometimes it is okay still, because, you know, Terry Brooks feels like Tolkien. That's okay. Tolkien was a great writer. Terry Brooks is taking the Tolkien-esque sort of writing in a new direction and doing something new with it. The fact that it feels like Tolkien is a selling point and not a drawback. There are times where it feels just too much to your readers and to you, and at that point, you do step back and say, okay, what can I do to make this more distinctive? What can I do to make this mine? What does my personal experience give me that I can put in this world and this story and change it to do something different, something that's distinctive to me? You are most likely worrying about this too much. I do know writers who won't read books that are too similar to the thing that they're trying to write while they're working on it. They will look for something completely different, such as some nonfiction to read while they're working on this book, as to not have unconscious influence. We actually did an entire Writing Excuses episode on avoiding unconscious influence, so you can Google that. I'm not sure if that's the exact title. Howard sometimes names them something pithier than that. But I would recommend go listen to that, get the perspectives of the other authors, hear what they do. But at the end of the day, stress about this less than you probably are stressing about it, unless you get a lot of feedback saying your writing feels derivative.
Jason Fagan in the chat asks, how do you get to know your characters when writing? Currently working on my own characters and struggling to get inside their heads rather than my own.
An exercise you can try with this is, Dan Wells taught me this. Do a monologue, a first-person monologue from this character's viewpoint, explaining their life to you and all the weirdness and strange things about it, and kind of almost like you're interviewing them. Ask them questions and have them answer as you're writing it, and see if you can really explore the way they see the world that way. For me, the best way to do this is to ask myself, how would they describe a simple room setting differently from the way I would? Go to a place. Go to like an Olive Garden or something. Sit down. Get out your laptop. Describe the room. then say, all right, what would my character notice that I wouldn't? What makes them distinctive from me? Would they never sit in this place because their back is to the door? Who was it that got shot on the one day he sat with his back to the door? They never did. It was one of those old West folks. Had a habit of never sitting with his back to the door, and then one day he did. Someone came in and shot him in the back of the head. Maybe your character would never do that and would complain about the seating. Maybe another character is very sensitive to certain scents and can smell the garlic in the air, and it's really annoying them. Try to describe the room very differently, and when you are going into your character's head, try to make sure that description is there. The biggest thing that should distinguish your characters from yourself is likely in their motivations. And so if they're feeling like you, my biggest worry as a professor would be that you have not given them strong and distinctive motivations for where they are. Most likely, may not be the case with you, but I see it a lot where the character has just been uprooted from their life and dumped into the story with no choice or volition over it. Happens a lot in a lot of different stories, not a bad thing, but because of that, their only motivation is to survive and to get shoved from adventure to adventure by the story. This tends to be a pretty weak motivation. There's a reason why people tend to connect to Sam better than they do with Frodo. Frodo's motivation is more along the lines of, I need to survive and get out of here or they're going to kill me. It does shift when he takes, responsibility for the ring in that kind of classic hero's journey sort of way. But Sam's motivation is, I'm going to be a good friend, and I'm going to support Frodo. He has a strong and distinctive motivation. I would not have gone and been chased by Nazgul like Sam did, because Sam is a true hero. And that motivation is really distinctive and interesting. Even though it's kind of pure and simple, it makes for a really compelling character. So you can have a character who is shoved out into an adventure who still has a really interesting motivation. And, ask yourself, what's their motivation? How's that different from your own?
This next question is from C.H. Brahm. They want to know if you can lock a Shardbearer in a suspended cage so they can't break out.
Can you lock a Shardbearer in a suspended cage so they can't break out? So you would have to do one of several things. Number one, put them in a material that cannot be cut by their Shardblade. So that is going to come down to highly invested materials most of the time, or aluminum. So put them in there. Or you can, it depends on if they've got a living blade or not. If they don't have a living blade, you can theoretically, actually it wouldn't be too hard, bind them in such a way that they just can't maneuver the sword, right? If you can get them, like you tie them against the wall and you make the ceiling really high so if they summon their Shardblade, what can they do? They can't get it around you'd have to get it so the chain wouldn't be swipeable up above, right? Somehow, something like that. Like, I can imagine you could get them. I mean, classic ways to deal with Shardbearers is just to tie them up in a net and put them in a place where if they summon their blade, it just is not leverageable to get them out. Then that would work. Those are your two best bets, other than, taking the blade away and unbonding it from them, which not too hard to do, depending on the situation.
And this question is from me. I'm assuming that a Shardbearer can sever their own soul, right? If they were to stab themselves?
Yeah, they could sever their own soul, yes. So.
Sorry, everyone. That one was for me. This one is from Itsy Bitsy. What has been the highlight of your career so far?
Highlight of my career so far. Whew, what a great question. Hugo Award. Winning the Hugo Award for Emperor's Soul. In part because I was really proud of that story. In part because I'd been nominated for a lot of things before that and never won any of them. Winning for a short fiction, which is not my forte, though novellas are cheating because they're really long fiction. But that was really cool. I had quite the good day that day when we won for Writing Excuses and then for Emperor's Soul, which are two of the things that I've done that I consider most worthy of said recognition. So,
This one from one Pablo Sequeira. How do you choose your next to be read book?
Almost always my next to be read book is a book waiting to get a potential cover blurb from me, given to me by my editor, one of my students who's getting published, my agent, or one of my friends. So, my reading time, oftentimes I want to watch what the new people are doing, which is one of the reasons why I do this, is I feel like one of the dangers of being where I am in my career is to stop paying attention to what the new authors are doing and not learning from them. So I do try to read first books when I can.
This one is from Lisa Grieve. She says, how do you save yourself psychologically when you are writing for dark characters?
So, this is not generally a problem for me because my own psychology is very, very stable. Maybe a little too stable. I think I talked about this last time. So, one of the best movies ever is Unbreakable, right? By M. Night Shyamalan. And in this movie, there is a character who theorizes that if people whose bones break all the time exist, there must be people whose bones never break. Now, that's a false syllogism, but it makes for a really cool story. That partially clicked with me because I have some friends and family who are bipolar, and their moods vary widely based on where they are in the bipolar cycle. I am the opposite. I wake up every day feeling almost exactly the same. If you have a scale of 1 to 100, with 1 being severely depressed and 100 being just wonderfully happy, and then 200 is manic, right? I am a 75 all the time, whether it's my wedding day or whether it's the juriest day you can imagine. I vary from like a 65 to an 85 maybe. Almost always a 75. And this has led me to be incredibly stable in my writing career. Very, very steady. It means that I don't get angry, really. A mild annoyance at my children is the most negative emotion you will ever see me feeling. But it also means that I do not experience a lot of the highs that other people do. And you find me being very fascinated by people who feel differently from myself. And the curious thing is that fiction, for whatever weird thing happens with my brain, while I'm reading a book by someone else, for a short time, I do feel those things like they do in the books. I don't generally in my own writing. But if I do, if I'm writing a really dark scene and I'm able to get into that, I snap back really quickly after I finish the scene. And so because of my own unique brain chemistry, this isn't really a problem for me. And it is definitely something that I've looked at times as being a superpower, and at other times it can be a little rough. Like my wife, when we were dating, she's like, I am dating a robot. How will I ever know if he actually loves me? This is serious sorts of things that come up when you are around Brandon, who is basically the same person every day. And fortunately, I have stories that help me understand other people, and I have people who are willing to put up with the fact that I have this very almost dangerous levels of stability in my life, and I am very, very thankful for them because of that.
It's a great phrase, dangerous levels of stability. Symbolism No Why says, you mentioned your friends suggesting books to you. What's the last thing you read that you couldn't put down? And do you read or do audiobooks for recreational reading?
Almost always audiobooks, and the book I'm reading right now is fantastic and is A Darker Shade of Magic by Victoria Schwab. Is it under VE or is it Victoria?
I think it's VE.
It's VE. We had her on Writing Excuses, and she was brilliant. You'll be able to listen to her. I guess she started this month, and she was awesome. And Adam grabbed me a copy of her audiobook because we had like credit on Audible or something. Because I said I want to listen to it, and it is indeed very good.
This one is from Evelyn Basham. She says, "Hey Brandon, on future tours, will you do presentations or the one-on-one signings?"
So what we ended up deciding for this new tour, if you saw the little poll on our website, overwhelmingly people wanted me to do the longer presentation with a shorter signing. And so that's what we're going to do. The plan is right now to do 5 dates in the US, 3 in the UK, and 1 in Canada. Don't quote me on that though, because we haven't locked them down. So it'll be a shorter tour than some of the previous ones I've done. That means I'm unlikely, for instance, to be able to get to all the places that I usually go. Most likely there will be 1 Pacific Northwest date, 1 California date, and maybe 1 Midwest date and 2 East Coast dates, or maybe 3 East Coast dates. This is just because touring has gotten so difficult, and I do need to go to the UK. So there will be almost assuredly a signing in London that will use this format, and something up north. I think we're looking at 3 dates in the UK, which would likely be Leeds and Scotland, maybe. Don't quote me on that. But then back to either Toronto or Vancouver for a signing for the Canadians, which I haven't done in a while. And the format will be that I will speak for 2 hours instead of 45 minutes. All the books will be pre-signed. We will have them in the thing in a theater, so it's more like a presentation. Hopefully with nice seats that are comfy. You will have an extended Q&A and extended reading. I will bring to the US States Isaac. I'm not sure, he may want to go to the UK also. He's expressed interest in going to the UK. So there's a decent chance Isaac will be in the UK with me as well. And then we will have a lottery, not paid. Everyone gets an equal shot to get a ticket to come get your book personalized. There will be 100 people, most likely, who get drawn, and you will get 2 books, which means you may bring a person with you and get 2 of your books personalized, or you may give that away to another person who is there with you. That way, if there are teens or children who win, they can bring their parent along and either get 2 books or 1 with the parent. So a line of 200 people, which will take me roughly 2.5 hours to get through. So all told, theoretically, the signing should only be 6.5 hours instead of 8 or 9. So it'll shorten it a little bit for me, and hopefully make it more survivable long term. So it'll take me about 2 hours to sign all the books ahead of time.
Excellent. This one is from Ethan. He says, "Is lift a translation of a Rosharan word for lift, or is lift the actual sound people make when they say her name?"
Great question. It is in translation. Most of the time, you will be able to assume that a name like that is in translation. Wax and Wane probably isn't. It's probably just their names, but that one's the hard one to decide on, right? Because I like the pun a lot, but they don't have a moon on Scadrial, so waxing and waning is not part of the conversation as much. But I always imagine that the languages on Scadrial kind of sound earthy, even though they have no relation to Earth whatsoever, because that's just how I built Scadrial, as kind of an Earth analog. But most of the time, if you run into a name like Lift, it is in translation.
Cool. This one is from Dante015. They say, Brandon, if you were basing a magic system in part on real-world physics or chemistry, how far down the rabbit hole of science would you go in making it?
Most of mine are based on real-world science and physics, but with a hefty dose of fantasy. If you were going to be less of a dose of fantasy, it just depends on how far would I go. Well, you can see what I would do. I do tend to do the healthy dose of fantasy. Like, the Rosharan magic systems are based on the fundamental forces, right? That's where they started. That's not where they ended up, right? You can really only recognize gravitation from the fundamental forces as actually still being a thing in the Rosharan magic system. But the idea of fundamental forces, and I'm like, well, what would the weak force look like as a magic system? And then I just kind of went crazy off from that and things like that. So I tend to use the real-world physics as a very squishy springboard from which I go some direction off on some weird tangent and come up with a magic system. I mean, Allomancy was based in part off of vector physics, right? But, I mean, I write fantasy. I do not write hard science fiction. And so, if I were going to take one and really try to stay close, then I could see myself going pretty deeply down the rabbit hole. But then I just kind of ask myself, what am I breaking? Like, what am I changing? And what am I trying to achieve? What's the effect I'm going for in doing this? Yeah, I guess my answer is, what would I do? You have seen what I would do.
From Facebook, Lindsay Hughes asks, I'm amazed at the versatility of your writing. For example, the Stormlight archive is distinctly different from Skyward. How did you develop the skill to flow between styles and voice? And they also want to know, where is your masterclass?
Where is my masterclass?
Yeah, like it's one of the online teaching things.
Oh, right. I've had a bunch of people ask me if I'll do one of these masterclass things. And at the end of the day, because I am recording my lectures at BYU and posting them, I feel like doing that for free is better than me trying to come up with a masterclass that would take either would be very similar to my class, because I wouldn't want to write a whole new curriculum, or would take so much time away that I probably wouldn't want to end up doing it. So I do the BYU course instead of a masterclass like the various ones available online. Maybe someday I will change that, but for now, we will start posting on this channel the courses from this year, the lectures from this year. How do you learn to change styles? This is actually a very good question. In visual art, in painting, one of the things you can do to learn to paint is to practice imitating great masters and trying to match their style. I think this is a valid thing to do in writing as well. I have made a habit of periodically going to great masters, reading their writing, and seeing if I can do a version of it. I did this with Faulkner when I was trying to write Taravangian on his very smart day, for instance. And I love doing this just for fun to see if I can match a writer's style. I haven't published it, but I did this with J.K. Rowling. During my early days, I did this with Robert Jordan, trying to learn how to write and see how he did things. And it's just a very fun thing to do. And it helps you as a writer kind of understand themes in different forms of writing. And manipulate things like sentence length, chapter and paragraph length, tone, and styles of humor, so that you can use them for different types of story. So give it a try. Try seeing if you can write a lost Jane Austen novel, or a chapter from a lost Jane Austen novel. See if you can do it. For one of my books, write a lost Brandon Sanderson story. Take Anne McCaffrey and see if you can match her her fantastic vocabulary in trying to do a Anne McCaffrey story, and not make it feel like you just grabbed a thesaurus. there's just there's a lot of fun to be had as a writer in learning to mimic other styles and then learning to use those as tools to adapt them.
Stephen Cundy asks, if you were to write Elantris now, with all the writing experience that you've gained over your career, would you change anything?
So, this has two questions. If you ask if I could magically rewrite Elantris, no, because don't mess with the timeline. Rule number one of any, if you were ever giving a wish or powers or something like that, don't mess with the timeline. I've read enough stories. It goes very poorly for people who mess with the timeline. You will accidentally erase yourself, and or you will find new meaning in life by discovering how wonderful everything is because you lived it. That doesn't happen as often as you just mess everything up. But if you're asking, like, more in the philosophical sense, yeah, there are a lot of things I would change about Elantris. I have an autistic character in Elantris that I did not do a very good job with. That is more of a pop science version of autism than it is an actual in-depth look at what it is to live with autism. My prose is pretty rough back then. Prose has never been my strongest suit, granted, but I do think I've gotten a lot better over the last 20 years. Has it been 20 years? Man, it's been 20 years since I wrote Elantris. Published 15, but 20 years ago I wrote it. I think my prose has improved dramatically over the years, and I think my my ability to do dialogue has improved, and a lot of things like that. Would I change any major plot features of Elantris? No. I'm actually fairly pleased with Elantris plot-wise, and I think there are aspects to it, right? I mean, Raoden's character arc is primarily externally driven, right? He is not a character who is going through a big change internally, but that it was intentional when I sat down to write it. The book I had written right before was about a deep and angsty character who had one of these very, very dramatic character arcs, and I was tired of angst, and I wanted somebody who dealt with external pressure in a fantastic way, and was put into a very extreme situation externally, and was somebody who was kind of a little more like me in that that didn't really faze him, and he did his best with the situation, and I like that aspect of it. It does mean that some people who read it think Raoden isn't as deep as someone like Kaladin, which you are perfectly fine in thinking that, but I think they're just different types of characters, right? I wasn't trying to write somebody angsty in Raoden, and I'm pleased with how he turned out. Serene as a character was always kind of me trying to write someone who was a little more confident than they perhaps deserve to be. That's a personality trait of Serene. I actually, when I was plotting Stormlight, I once described Yasna to someone in my writing group as the person that Serene thinks she is. And I like that about Serene. She's young. She's got gumption and grit, and she's not quite as capable as she thinks she is, but you know what? Thinking you're capable can get you a long ways, as long as you have a minimum level of capability, and she does. So, and I'm very proud of Hrathen as antagonist. It has taken me until the Way of Kings and Taravangian to find someone that I feel is as strong an antagonist as Hrathen from my very first book, which, I'm still very pleased with how he turned out. So,
this one is from the Bearded Bookworm. They say, do you find it hard to take your writer hat off when you read a book or watch TV or movies?
Yes, I do. In fact, I have stopped trying to. This was a much bigger deal earlier in my life when not being able to take off that hat made it much harder to experience media. And for a while, reading I just didn't do as much of, or I was very, whatever. But then I got over it, and I started to realize that most things that are worth watching or reading are going to be doing something better than I can do it. Even if I think they're messing other stuff up, they'll be doing something really well. And if they aren't, I probably won't keep watching or reading, right? But I just finished The Mandalorian. The Mandalorian is not breaking new ground. I think everybody's agreeing this, but it does what it wants to do really well. And I feel like I learned from the way it did the thing that it wanted to do and how well it did it. And the fact that it's not trying to break hugely new ground doesn't matter to me. The fact that it is striving to achieve something and doing a good job with it is admirable, and I enjoy it. And once in a while, I'll hit something that I'm just in awe of, and I will watch the whole time, just being amazed by how incredible someone pulled this off. Like the last time I had that experience was Infinity War, right? Infinity War making the villain, the protagonist, is a really hard thing to do. It is just extremely difficult to have your villain drive the action, be the sympathetic viewpoint, and then have the villain achieve what they want in a way that leaves you both horrified and satisfied. It's very difficult, and I spent that whole movie in awe. And I think the fact that I'm a writer added more depth to that, because I could watch and analyze and understand the steps they were taking. I can no longer go back to simply enjoying something like I used to, which I used to feel sad about that, but now my ability to enjoy things that are done very well on a professional level, and admiration for somebody who does something that well, makes up for it, in my opinion. And so being able to read a Terry Pratchett book and just be in awe of the way that he can blend humor, commentary, and characterization with plot in a way that is seamless and amazing, I think I get more out of the book. And so I don't know that I would want to, nowadays, be able to turn that off.
Troy Meacham asks, for your opinion, he says, is it recommended that aspiring writers debut their first novel in a different genre than what they want to be known for?
No, it is recommended the other way. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to do what's recommended, but if I were to poll agents and editors right now, I can guarantee a 90+% answer of no, never do that. The reason being that editors and publishers want very much to sink their marketing dollars into explaining to everyone who you are and what you're doing as a new author. And if you are indie published, then you are going to be doing that same thing, working very hard to convince everybody to understand what you are. And if you are intending to change immediately so that all of that branding and all of that that work that has been done by the marketing team or by your own advertising dollars is suddenly negated as you aren't that thing anymore, then publishers hate that. You can do it anyway, right? My third book was a middle grade after writing and sending in, I guess it was my fourth book, right? Yeah, fourth book was middle grade. After sending in Elantris and the first two Mistrum books, I wrote a middle grade wacky comedy. Publisher did not want me doing that. They wanted me writing the book that they had contracted me to write. But my own artistic inclinations led me a different direction. Nothing wrong with that, but it will hurt you. At least in their eyes, it will hurt you. It is hard enough for someone to be successful at one thing. There are very, very few people who manage to break out in multiple genres.
Laura Richards says, any honeymoon destination suggestions for a pair of fantasy novel lovers?
Lots of them. we went to Hawaii, and then I wrote Warbreaker, which is ecologically inspired by Hawaii, and then it was a write-off. Which is one of the great things about being a writer is you can write off a lot of your trips. I'm not an accountant and not giving tax advice. Go to your tax professional to find out if this is actually something you can do. But I really like that. I love Prague as a fantasy writer. I'm getting a thumbs up from Adam, who loves Prague also. So I love Belgium. I went to Belgium this year and enjoyed sitting by the canal and writing while enjoying a waffle and French fries. Almost anywhere can work, though. I wrote Emperor's Soul after a trip to Taiwan and touring the Palace Museum, which had just fantastic history and lore and culture and things like that. And so Taiwan makes a great place to visit for a honeymoon. So basically anywhere, right? I mean, Rosharan is partially inspired. If you live in America and don't want to go overseas, go to Zion National Park or to Arches National Park, and you will see part of the inspiration for the Stormlight Archive. Do some cool hikes, hike the Zion Narrows or something like that, and it's the closest you can get to visiting Rosharan.
This one from Stormfront Bricks. They say, if you could bond a spren, what type would you bond, and which of the two surges would be your favorite?
So I've always wanted to fly. So we are probably looking at Windrunner or Skybreaker, and I would probably choose a Honor Spren because they are a little easier to get along with than High Spren. And of course, gravitation, flying around.
Okay, this one from Facebook from John Robert Dax Dyson wants to know where the inspiration for Kaladin's fighting style came from.
Kaladin's fighting style. It depends on which fighting style you're talking about. Just classic spearman fighting is based off of rank and file spear formations. Nothing too spectacular. I did mix it with a little bit of Eastern spear fighting, specifically some Chinese spear fighting. But really, your classic spear fighting technique is pretty multicultural. What you're going to want to do with a spear. I add flourishes, which come more from katas now and then than they do from actual real-world fighting. Though, if you want to, a good resource for this is Matt Easton's channel on YouTube. Scholar Gladiatoris? Scholar, yeah. It's Latin, I think. Matt Easton's channel is great because what he will do is he will have people doing historical martial arts, HEMA fighting, and they will do, here are 10 bouts of a person with a spear versus a person with a spear. Most of these are European styles, but like I said, spear fighting tends to be pretty similar across cultures. And doing just watching some short spear fights, or spear versus sword, or I specifically did watched a bunch of those bouts for Aelin's spear versus knife fight that we had in Oathbringer. Just really handy, the fact that he films large bouts like that and puts them on the internet. So there you go.
I can't pronounce this, so I'm just going to go straight to the question. What influence did Anne McCaffrey's novels have on your writing?
Boy, that one's going to be hard to trace because being the second fantasy author I really ever got into, and the one I read the most books by, right? I just ripped through the Pern books and then read them through a second and third time in the following years. The influence on me is probably something it's inexorable, right? I just cannot. Is that the right word?
Unquantifiable?
Unquantifiable. What is can't be taken out? Inexorable just means inevitable, I think. I'll have to. Peter's not here to tell us. Peter's the one who always catches me on the words. It is something I cannot pull out of my my soul. It's indivisible from me.
Unexcisable.
Unexcisable. There you go. Unexcisable. There's a good word. Certainly, her vocabulary inspired me, but I don't consider myself one that has nearly the vocabulary she does. I liked her use of viewpoint, and it was kind of the forerunner of how I ended up developing viewpoint. I would say her narrative of person versus nature intermixed with smaller persons versus person conflicts was really handy for developing Rosharan, right? I mean, you can look at Rosharan and say, hey, the fantasy series that probably is the most similar in world-building theme is Pern, with the thread dropping from the sky and having this kind of hostile environment that periodically comes to try to wipe mankind out, right? So that had an influence, but really her characters and her writing style were fundamental in how I ended up developing my own style.
Jeff Peterson from Facebook says, as an author, where do you think the balance is between buying books and supporting your local library?
Wherever balance is best for you. I think this is an individual thing. So yeah, I mean, my experience has been that anyone who uses the library extensively tends to also be one of the biggest buyers of books out there. And my gut instinct, though I don't have research to back this up, says that if people visit the library more often, their book buying goes up, not down. That would be my expectation, because it means that they are falling more and more in love with books. They are more likely to stop by a bookstore and be like, oh yeah, I really like this one, I'll buy this one. They're more likely to buy books probably as gifts because they are more widely read. So instead of buying some other thing, they're going to buy a book for someone. They're more likely just, I think libraries are primers for book sales. So wherever your personal inclination lies, I can't really say for you.
Another one from Facebook, from Blaine Lassard. They say, how did you decide which human personality aspects to assign to shards? I feel like there's a real-life story here.
So it's a little less real-life story and a little more like how I divided up the medals in Mistborn, more along the lines of I need each of these emotions or attributes to be distinctive, and I need each of the characters, the vessels, to be distinctive who hold up. And so because I'm building 16 of these things, it means that I have to do a lot of work to make them all individual and things like this. And my world building in that area was less along the lines of story I had in my life causing me to do this, and more, man, I have to do 16 of these, let's try to make them all distinctive. No, those two seem too similar. Let's do a different one there. And lots of trial and error along those lines.
This one from the chat feed, Zach. He says, I have a writing question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an underwriter, as in I tend to write very short scenes, chapters, and stories. How can I write longer works?
This is rare. I would, having no real evidence, again, I would guess that 1 out of 10 of my students are underwriters rather than overwriters. It may be less than that. One thing is, you'll probably be great at short stories. So if you haven't read some short fiction, I would suggest having a look at that, because you probably are really going to be naturally good at the form. I would not recommend generally bloating your work by doing more. I would instead recommend, if you're underwriting, well, I have some friends who are like this, and people who read their books say, I just want to know more. So I guess it's not bloating to try to add a little bit more visual description. Sometimes people who are underwriting just are not setting the scene very well. You do not have to have George R. R. Martin style lavish descriptions of what the meal looks and tastes like, but you do need to have a scene set for the reader. And if you're not doing this, then practicing adding more sensory information could be one way to do this. Most writers ignore the sounds and smells and feel of a scene and only describe it visually. If you're doing that, adding in, don't go on and on, but adding in occasional mentions to other senses can be very useful in expanding your work. Another thing that tends to happen when people are underwriting is that they are not writing multiple viewpoints. And one thing you could do is have a contrasting viewpoint to your main character to complicate and twist the story to make you write two different perspectives on what's happening, which can be fascinating, can increase the story's power, and can force you to stretch as a writer to find two separate ways of looking at what's going on that are both distinctive and interesting. I would say another way you can do this is if things are just a little too easy for your characters, you might be writing too short. And in that case, you may need more conflict. Stories are built around conflict. Setting, character, and plot are all nice, but conflict is the glue that sticks them together. And without really solid conflict, you generally don't have a really solid story. So make things harder. Make more things go wrong. Make the task more difficult.
This one from the wonderfully named Harmony Sugarbaker. Do you have any Do any characters have a theme song? I'm assuming specifically your characters.
Do any of my characters have a theme song? I don't generally give the characters a theme song, though there is the Kaladin album on online that you can listen to that does a pretty good job of coming up with an imaginary score for the Stormlight archive. I think that is back up now after we got approval from DMG. I do generally, as I build my playlists, which if you haven't listened to my playlists, I've posted them on Spotify. Maybe Adam will post them in the comments section for people, a link to them. I did one for Stormlight 4 that I posted recently, and I had one for Stormlight 3. And usually on each of those albums, there's like one song that I'll turn on first that is kind of the theme for that book. And the song I turned on for Oathbringer all the time was Phil Lober's Alive, which is just this cool song I found. And the whole album is great. I don't know the artist other than this album, but the whole album was great. Two Steps from Hell often ends up like Star Sky has been a theme for previous books. And for this one, I can't pronounce it. It's in Irish. But there was this cool, in Irish or Celtic, I guess Irish, yeah. Some cool song that I will tell Adam which one it is and he can post, that just got my brain thinking of the right things when I was working on Stormlight 4. So he's writing that down to remind me after, and we'll post that in the comment section. And Told Double, Dub, and Told Dub, something like that. It's from the playlist.
Okay. I'll look for that one. Mm-hmm. This next one is from Najawin. They say Scott Lynch is semi-famous for getting a multi-book deal for approximately 60 pages he wrote on the spot. Are there any other authors with similar stories the fans won't have heard of?
Man, do I know of any stories like this? When Goodkind got his deal in '94 or whenever it was, it made huge waves in the publishing industry because he was the first one to get a very big major deal. It was something like $750,000 for 3 books in '94, which is a pretty big deal. But I don't know of anyone who just wrote on the spot. Name of the Wind won Riders of the Future with just like a chunk of it being sent in, and I believe one of the judges read it and was like, "This is really good," and gave it to their agent. I could be, you'd have to ask Pat if this is true, but I think that's what happened. And the agent's like, "Wow, this is really good. You got a whole book, kid?" And Pat's like, "Yes, I do." And that's how Name of the Wind sold. Scalzi sold his book by serializing it on his blog. Back in an era where you just really didn't see that very much. Blogs, like that word was brand new when Scalzi was doing this. Nowadays, people have Wattpad and things like that, and they post their work online. But back then, that was really a strange thing for someone to do, and turns out that Editor Tor was one of the readers of his blog and liked the book and bought it. So.
This next one from Joseph Nguyen asks if you've ever played the Souls series of video games.
You have not seen me wearing my Sunbro shirt, which I do very frequently. I have to put that one on the next stream. Yes, I have. In fact, I get to be a From Software hipster because I played all of the Kingsfield games back in the day. Played through all of those, and so when Demon's Souls came out, I was given that by my brother who knew I loved their games and played Demon's Souls before Dark Souls even was a thing. And I rank Demon's Souls as one of my favorite games of all time. Granted, Dark Souls is a better and more polished game in almost every regard, but Demon's Souls was the first one that I played. And in many ways, Dark Souls is a soft reboot of Demon's Souls. It's a remake in a lot of ways. And so if you've played Dark Souls, you've kind of played Demon's Souls. But still love that game. Just replayed Dark Souls on the Switch, actually. This time, what did I build this time? I built a Faith build, which I hadn't done before. So, love Bloodborne. So, hoping that we will see a Bloodborne 2 eventually. And yeah.
This next one from Sokoid is wondering if there's anyone in the Cosmere capable of winning a fight with Landman Dragarin without investiture.
No. I would not say that there is. Lan is the best swordsman I have ever written. Aelin, of people I've written about, would be the closest, but Lan would win.
This next one from Austin Allender asks, how much of the Cosmere did you plan ahead when you started, and what advice would you give for writing an expanded universe, aside from making each book stand on its own?
Okay, well, you've got the most important one there already, so good for you. So, I did not have most of the Cosmere, in fact, any of the Cosmere, really ready when I wrote Elantris. I have a big advantage in that my early books were terrible and didn't get published, and so when I did get published, I knew what I was doing. I had already written a bunch of these books, I had already started putting them in the same universe, and I was able to do a reboot, basically, from the beginning, by releasing Elantris and Mistborn. Which is, if those early books had been published, then the Cosmere would be a lot less cohesive than it is, because I was able to say, wow, someone bought Elantris, which was the first book that I wrote in the Cosmere sequence, back before I really knew it was going to be in the Cosmere sequence. Like, when I put the pool in, I had no idea what the pool was. I just put it in. I'm like, this is a cool thing, I'll figure out what to do with it. But by the time I was writing Mistborn, I had put pools into things like Aether of Night and stuff like that, and I had the whole idea of Aiden Alcium. I came up with that when I was writing Dragonsteel, which is the book I wrote after Elantris. So it was really fortunate that I was able to basically do a reboot and restart continuity by publishing Elantris and then writing the Mistborn trilogy, knowing by then about the whole Cosmere and things like that. The origin of the Cosmere, I blame on me as a young man reading fantasy novels and inserting my own characters, including Hoyd, as characters in their books that none of the characters in those books knew was secretly on an adventure in their world and was going to be leaving and going to a new world. And so I would pick up a new book, like a Melanie Rum book after I read a Nan McCaffrey book, and I'd be like, all right, this is what my character did in Nan McCaffrey's world, and now they have jumped to this world, and we're going to have an adventure there, kind of behind the scenes. What advice would I give you? Well, let's see. Having a kind of cohesive theme, like, what is your goal? Why are you doing this? Why do you want to have a connected universe? For me, it's because I want to have, number one, a hidden epic, right? I knew that breaking in, I was going to be writing a lot of standalones, or at least I thought that when I was doing all of this, and I like really big epics, and so I was going to have a hidden epic to have an extra layer of interest to me in writing the books, to lay the groundwork for something I want to do later. I also really like the idea of different fantasy worlds having their cultures smashed together in some future book after you've come to know these different fantasy worlds, and then getting to read them coming into conflict with one another as their cultures conflicted and things like that. I thought that would be very fun and interesting. But ask yourself why. Why are you doing this? I think part of the reason that connected universes in cinema have been failing right and left is because their why was simply, well, this is popular with Marvel, so we'll do it too. And didn't have really a good reason or basis for their story. Even the new Star Wars films don't seem to have had a cohesive vision, even though they were, all in one series. Have a cohesive vision. Decide why you're doing this. Decide, what's interesting about it to you, so that you can add something. So you can not just have a connecting universe, but have a reason for doing it. Take good notes. Have really good notes. One of the most fun things you can do is go back and do something like I did with Secret History, which was super fun and fulfilling because I had good notes and I had laid the groundwork for being able to show a different viewpoint on a story that had already happened. So take good notes. If you can, get a good continuity editor to help you with that.
Related to your answer, many have wondered about your response to Rise of Skywalker, but I don't believe you've seen that yet.
I have not seen Rise of Skywalker yet. I do need to see it. I am a fan of JJ's work. I really enjoy a lot of the way he does storytelling. I did not enjoy the middle movie. And the longer I've had apart from it, the less I have thought of it. This is not really a dig against Rian Johnson. People, I think, are too down on Rian Johnson. I think he is a very skilled filmmaker. But it felt like the trilogy just did not have any vision. And one of the things I went to Star Wars for is cohesive vision. That's the thing that kept me going back to watch the prequels, one after another, even though Lucas's filmmaking in those had some serious flaws, and still does. I went back because I wanted to know what happened to the characters. I was really invested in them despite some of the problems in the storytelling. And the middle film killed my interest in most of the characters, which has not... It's just been hard to get myself out of the house to go see the third one. I do intend to do it. I want to do it, but it feels like my boy Finn. I loved Finn in The Force Awakens. I thought he was breath of fresh air. He was a fascinating character. I thought he was really interesting and flawed in all the right ways with a great backstory. And I just felt like there was just nothing for him to do in the middle film except be a joke. And that was hard. I've spent my whole career trying to get a character with a fraction of the mythical power and import that Luke Skywalker has. The man who was so optimistic that even though everyone told him otherwise, and he probably should have listened, he still believed in Darth Vader. That character was just... I love the Return of the Jedi. Even though, if you're going to look at it on an actual plotting basis, it is probably the weakest of the three originals. It is my favorite of the three originals because his fight with Darth Vader, despite the choreography being, 80s choreography and things like that, is some of the most powerful storytelling I have ever seen in cinema. And I loved it. And it is, one of my favorite things in all of cinema. And then to go into a movie to find him drinking blue milk and getting on his beard straight from the udder of some strange space alien, having no longer cared. And I know a lot of people say, look, this happened to Obi-Wan, this happened to Yoda, it's a theme in Star Wars. Theme in Star Wars was that Luke didn't do that. He broke that cycle. He went and believed in Darth Vader. Like, that's the core of who he is. And it was maybe the wrong move. Yoda said, don't do this in the second movie. And he did, because he cared about his friends. This is Luke Skywalker. He cares too much. And that movie just kind of broke my interest in Luke Skywalker, and because of that, in the whole series. I don't have the same problems with it that a lot of people seem to have with it online. I think, like I said, Ryan Johnson's a good filmmaker. It just didn't have vision. Like, the whole series didn't have vision. And so there's a diatribe. You guys have heard this all before from other people, and many of you, I'm sure, disagree with it, which is totally fine because art is about taste. That's what makes it art. But getting myself out to see Rise of Skywalker has been so tough because of this, and I'll see it. But man, I was really happy to watch The Mandalorian, which, as though I said earlier, it's not breaking any new ground. It was just a well done story, and that feels like what we've been missing in Star Wars for a while. Is just, someone who told us a story that felt like it belonged in a Star Wars world. So there you go.
Ethan C. Wants to know if there are any soft magic systems that you felt worked well.
Lots of soft magic systems work well. The classic is Tolkien's, right? I think that Tolkien's soft magic with Gandalf is just one of the ideal uses of soft magic, right? Where you don't know what it can do, but that serves to highlight your sense of wonder. But if you want a more modern example, and I hate to keep bringing it up, but Name of the Wind soft magic system is brilliant, right? Name of the Wind works partially for the same reason that Tolkien did, in that it has both a soft magic and a hard magic system. I talked about this last time a little bit, but I really like his naming system, which is a very soft magic, and the sense of wonder and mystery it adds to the world, and the way it contrasts to the hard magic system.
This one's from Emma Minsinger.
Mm-hmm.
She says, "Hi Brandon, how did you decide the forms that spren will take when they appear? For example, rain spren looking like melting candles."
Part of this is just I wanted interesting visuals. Part of this is kind of playing a little with mythology. So the spren started as personifications of weather and things like that. Like the earliest version of Syl, she was just the personification of the east wind, and there were 4 winds, which is a kind of very classic idea. And that evolved over time into all of these spren, taking a little bit more of a Shinto approach to it than a classical Greek mythology approach to it, where it had started. But a lot of these were then me looking for things that would be bizarre, interesting visuals, and somehow reinforce what I was trying to do. For instance, rain spren are a great example. The way they stare up and look like a candle are both reinforcements, right? During the weeping, when they're most common, spheres stop working, and you've got to start using candles. The way they stare at the sky unblinking is unnatural. You stare at the sky, and rain hits your eyeball, you're going to blink, but they just look up at it. And I like that kind of contrast, that dissonance. And Adam, we'll probably do this stack as the last stack today.
Okay.
What do you guys think? Then we'll be wrapping up at right around 11, I would guess. How many stacks will that mean that we've done?
I'm trying to keep this for about 10.
We did that.
This will get you to about 2,000 tonight, with about 3,000 left.
2,000 tonight with 3,000 left. All right. So we're going to need one more day on this, and I'll try to get a few of them in between left out in my signing room. And I'll listen to A Darker Shade of Magic when I do that.
Sounds good.
Sorry, we had a little comment issue that I was trying to solve. So I'm looking for a good question for you now. When writing big series, do you plan ahead the roles minor characters will play, or does that tend to grow more organically? And what are your thoughts on minor characters having character arcs?
The more character arcs, the better. Harder to do when they're not a viewpoint character, but what some of my favorite things in movies and in fiction are when the minor character that you only see a couple of times you can pick out that they have had an arc and changed the course of the story. That is gold when that can happen, and I love it. So thumbs up on minor characters having arcs. Tough to do without having it overshadow, but also very fun. Do I do it? I would say with minor characters, it is more often organic than planned. But characters tend to be the most organic part of the process for me anyway. But I would say 3 out of 5 to 4 out of 5 times it is organic rather than planned.
Sorry, looking for another one.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully this little session was a little easier for some of our fans who aren't based in the States to watch. We probably have to go for like right in the middle of the night if we want to do one really for the Europeans, right? But we picked this at a different time specifically, so hopefully that works for you guys.
This next question from Coach Dorak says, did you write Amaram as an opposite of Dalinar, or was he simply a bad guy meant to spur Kaladin?
So I meant Amaram to be the representation of the corrupt side of the Alethi. Meaning they are all talk and very little heart. Very, very little of what they say to the worst of the Alethi gets to who they really are. They would rather be known as someone honorable than be actually honorable. And this I consider a major problem with their society, and I needed somebody to represent this, right? Someone to, so part of it is to represent a contrast to Kaladin's ideals. This belief that that light eyes were these paragons of virtue, but I also needed somebody. You may say an opposite to Dalinar. In a way, he is an opposite to Dalinar, but more he just represents Alethi society. And I did want it to be that he wasn't just all the way corrupt. Like when he makes his decision in book 1 in the flashbacks, he is making a decision. There's a moment where he's considering. By the time you are seeing him in later books, that decision is taking him down a path that leaves him very far from any sort of redemption. But it was a choice, and he wasn't just corrupt from the get-go. But yeah, he represents what I feel would be bad about Alethi society, and a kind of honor society that is more about looking honorable than being.
We have another good question from Itsy Bitsy. It says, what do you like most about reading a story? The characters, the magic system, the plot, and which tropes most entice you into a story?
So it's almost always the characters, with the caveat it's more that the characters make me stay, but it's the plot that will get me, or the setting that will get me initially hooked. So hearing about a good premise will make me say, ooh, I want to pick up that book. But if the characters don't grab me, then I probably won't keep reading. So they won't keep me coming back. I am a sucker for, the tropes you see me using, right? I am a sucker for the thief with a heart of gold. Like, that just gets me every time. I love a good heist. I love a good lovable rogue. Those are probably my favorite style, my favorite types of tropes. But I do like there's both a trope of the magic is leaving the world, which is Tolkien uses and is very common in fantasy, and magic is coming back to the world. And you can tell from the stories that I have written which of those two that I prefer more. I like the world is getting more magical, not less.
This next one is from Kai Ellie. Said, if you bonded a spren, what do you think its personality would be like?
Boy, I have no idea. I like it when spren contrast, so it would probably be hyper emotional. Would be my guess, because it would make for better storytelling that way.
John Dean is just inquiring about possibility of new things coming into the Reckoner's world.
New things are coming to the Reckoner's world. Actually, yes. I am working on something new with the Reckoners right now that I can't quite announce yet, but it is likely to be audio original. I think I talked about that a little bit in the State of Sanderson.
This next one comes from Between the Books and Me. They say, I love humor and epic fantasy, but I don't see very many crossovers between the two. Are there any real epic comedic fantasies that you can recommend?
Epic comedic fantasies? Boy, that is actually rough, right? Like, you're right. Most of the fantasies that are comedic are not epic. The first Hawk and Fisher book, before it was called Hawk and Fisher, I remember laughing at it. I haven't read it in years, by Simon Green. What was it called? Blue Moon Rising? I remember that being funny, but those turned into fantasy police procedurals rather than into actual epic fantasy, and I haven't read them in years. Obviously, there's Pratchett, but Pratchett is not epic. Pratchett is, again, more police procedural. What is epic? Do you guys know of any epic fantasies that are comedic? I can't really think of one.
No.
So maybe that means you have to write it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can't think of one.
Comedic fantasy has had a tough time. Editors tell me it is just a really hard sell. Even Pratchett took forever to take off in the States and never took off to the extent he deserved to, the extent that he took off in other regions like the UK. So it is a tough sell. If the most brilliant fantasy humorist that I've ever read had a hard time taking off, it seems like this is a tough sell across the board. All right, guys, I'm going to call it here. I've got thousands more of these to do, so we will come back and do these sometime, maybe on Friday after writing group or before writing group or something like that. But we'll see, maybe on Saturday. All right, thanks, guys. See you next time.